What if the person you think you are doesn't exist? Not metaphorically, not philosophically, but literally. The I you've spent your life defending, polishing, and presenting to the world might be nothing more than a clever hallucination. The voice narrating your every thought, the sense of control behind every decision, the story that began with your name, all of it could be a fiction, woven together by the mind to make chaos feel coherent. Neuroscientists suggest the self is a construction, psychologists call it a narrative, and ancient philosophers claimed it was an illusion long before science existed. Yet we cling to it desperately, terrified of what might remain without it. This journey is about peeling back that illusion layer by layer, to see what hides beneath the mask you call me. And if you stay until the end, you might discover that losing yourself isn't the end of anything, it's the beginning of everything. Close your eyes for a moment, and try to remember who you were 10 years ago. The place you lived, the people around you, the ambitions that once felt so important. They rise like ghosts from the corners of your mind. And yet, for all their vividness, these memories are not happening now. They are not real in the present moment. They are echoes, fragile reconstructions stitched together by a brain that can't help but narrate. And more importantly, they are the glue that holds together the most powerful illusion of all, the illusion of you. We think of memory as a kind of internal archive, a place where experiences are stored and retrieved intact, like books on a shelf. But the truth is far stranger. Neuroscientists have known for decades that memory is not a recording, it's a story that changes a little every time you tell it. Each act of remembering is also an act of rewriting. Details are added or lost, emotions are colored differently, sequences are rearranged. Over time the memory becomes less about what was, and more about what the mind believes should have been. And yet, these reconstructions are the very foundation of our sense of self. Consider how you finish the sentence. I am. Most likely, you define yourself by what you remember. I am a teacher. I am a survivor. I am someone who grew up in a small town. These are not facts etched into the fabric of the universe. They are memory-based stories, and without them, the self begins to crumble. Strip away the narrative of where you came from, what you've done, and who you think you are, and the I you defend so fiercely becomes almost impossible to locate. This dependency on memory is what makes the self so fragile, and so deceptive. Imagine waking up tomorrow with complete amnesia. Your skills, language, and personality might still surface automatically, products of neural pathways, rather than conscious recollection. But the story of you would be gone. Would you still be you? If the self were truly a fixed entity, memory loss shouldn't erase it. Yet in practice, identity collapses without the continuity memory provides. This suggests that the self is not a fundamental essence, but a story continuously reconstructed from fragments of the past. Psychologists call this the narrative self, the internal autobiography that explains who we are and how we came to be. It's comforting, grounding, and deeply persuasive, but it's also selective and biased. We remember victories more vividly than failures. We reinterpret past mistakes to make ourselves the hero. We even invent false memories, not maliciously, but because the mind prefers a coherent story over a messy truth. Studies show that people confidently remember events that never happened, simply because their brains have woven them into the narrative. And once embedded, these illusions shape future decisions, beliefs, and behaviors. Think about how memory shapes your relationships. A single betrayal from years ago can define how you see someone today, even if they've changed entirely. A nostalgic memory from childhood can anchor you to a place long after it's lost its meaning. Memory doesn't just reflect reality, it creates the emotional context that gives meaning to reality. And since the self is built from memory, the you who exists today is always a reflection of selective storytelling. Even the passage of time itself is distorted by memory. Some moments stretch endlessly in recollection, while others vanish into nothingness. The years of childhood feel longer than the decades of adulthood, not because they were longer, but because the density of memory changes how we perceive them. Our sense of a continuous, stable self depends on this distortion. It turns the scattered snapshots of existence into a seamless film. Without it, we would experience life as a series of disconnected moments, each arising and disappearing without ownership. But perhaps the most unsettling truth is this. The self is not just shaped by memory, it is memory. The brain's default mode network, the region most active when we think about ourselves, overlaps almost perfectly with the regions involved in autobiographical recall. When you say I, you are essentially calling up a database of remembered stories. The self is the storyteller that memory creates, and without that storyteller, there's nothing left to anchor identity. This doesn't mean memory is bad or useless. It's one of the most extraordinary capacities of the human mind. It allows us to learn, plan, connect, and evolve, but the danger lies in mistaking the story for the truth. When you believe that your memories are you become trapped in them, defined by your past, constrained by your history, and terrified of anything that threatens the narrative. Yet, if you can see memory for what it is, a selective, fallible, constantly rewritten fiction, the illusion begins to lose its grip. The past stops dictating who you are, the story stops confining what's possible, and in the silent gap that remains, something deeper than memory begins to emerge, a presence that exists before the story, beyond the narrative, untouched by the passing of time. This presence cannot be remembered, because it was never born. It cannot be forgotten because it never leaves. And perhaps, beneath all the layers of recollection and revision, that timeless awareness is the only part of you that was ever real. From the moment you wake up, a quiet certainty hums beneath everything you do. I am here. It's the simple, unexamined assumption that makes the world seem stable and navigable. You brush your teeth because I need to get ready. You answer messages because I have friends. You plan for tomorrow because I will still exist. This unshakable sense of I feels so obvious, so intimate, that questioning it seems absurd, and yet, the deeper you look, the more it slips through your fingers, like trying to hold on to smoke. Ask yourself, what exactly is this I? Is it the body you inhabit? But the body is in constant flux. Cells die and regenerate, bones replace themselves, even the atoms you're made of cycle out and in over the years. Not a single particle remains from the child you once were, yet you still say, I was 5 once. Are you the memories you carry? Then what about the moments you've forgotten? Do they no longer belong to you? Are you the voice narrating your thoughts? But who is it that hears that voice? If the thinker and the observer are separate, which one is you? This is where the illusion begins to reveal itself. The self feels like a singular entity, a central pilot sitting behind the eyes, steering the ship of your life. But when you look for the pilot, there's no one there. Instead, you find a collection of processes happening all at once, thoughts bubbling up, emotions surging and fading, bodily sensations arising and vanishing, decisions forming before you're aware of them. These are all real phenomena, but none of them is the self. They are occurring, spontaneously, automatically, without any I orchestrating them. Consider the simple act of deciding to lift your hand. Neuroscientific studies show that the brain initiates the action milliseconds before you consciously decide to move. Your awareness lags behind the process, like a narrator describing events that have already unfolded. And yet, afterward, you confidently claim, I chose to raise my hand. The illusion remains intact. The mind stitches together a story of authorship, inventing a self that appears to be in control. But that self is a retroactive character, not a real cause. The philosopher David Hume noticed this centuries ago. When he turned his attention inward, he found no stable self, only a bundle of perceptions flashing and disappearing in rapid succession. Modern neuroscience echoes this. The self is not an object to be found but a pattern the brain constructs from countless moving parts. It's a story that consciousness tells itself to explain what's happening. And like all stories, it's compelling precisely because it feels true. The illusion deepens because the I is reinforced everywhere, by language, by memory, by society. Every sentence you speak assumes it. I think, I feel, I believe, I want. The very grammar of thought depends on a subject. And yet, these words hide a subtle trick. They imply the existence of a thinker behind the thought, a feeler behind the feeling, a chooser behind the choice. But look closer, and you'll see that thoughts arise without a thinker, feelings surge without a feeler, choices unfold without a chooser. They just are. Even memory, that great architect of personal identity, is less reliable than we imagine. Neuroscience shows that memory is not a recording of the past, but a reconstruction, rewritten each time it's recalled. The you in those memories is not the same consciousness experiencing this moment. Yet your mind stitches the fragments together into a continuous narrative, a timeline that convinces you of a single, enduring self. This is the illusion's most elegant trick. It weaves a sense of permanence out of impermanence, identity out of change. And what of the body? That anchor of physical existence. It too betrays the illusion. Every 7 to 10 years, nearly every cell in your body is replaced. The body you inhabit now is not the one you had a decade ago, and yet you feel continuous. Why? Because the mind tells a story of sameness, a narrative bridge spanning the gaps between the ever-changing states of being. This is not to say the self is meaningless. On a practical level, it serves an important purpose. It organizes experience, allows communication, and enables survival. But utility is not the same as truth. A map is useful, but it is not the territory. The self is a map, a simplification that makes the complexity of existence navigable. But we mistake the map for the land, the label for the thing, the story for the storyteller. If the self is a mirage, then what is real? Beneath the story of I, there is awareness. Vast, silent, unbounded. Thoughts appear within it. Sensations dance across it. Identities rise and fall like waves upon it. But awareness itself does not belong to anyone. It has no name, no age, no face. It is not yours, and yet, it is what you are. And here lies the paradox. The self is both real and unreal. Real as a useful fiction, a functional illusion. Unreal as an independent entity, a solid core at the center of experience. Like a rainbow, undeniably visible, yet intangible. The self exists only as a phenomenon of conditions. Remove those conditions, and it vanishes. The first crack in the illusion is seeing this clearly. The I you've believed in is not an object you can hold, but a mirage projected by the mind. And once you see it as such, you can begin to ask the deeper question, if I was never truly here, then what has been living this life all along? If memory is the raw material from which the self is constructed, then story is the architecture that gives it form. Our lives are not simply a string of events that happen to us. They are narratives we build, revise, and retell, until they feel solid enough to live inside. And in that process, something remarkable and deeply deceptive happens. The story becomes the self. We stop saying I have a story and begin to believe I am the story. From childhood, you are handed pieces of narrative like bricks. You're shy, you're clever, you're stubborn, you're a disappointment. Each word becomes part of a framework that shapes how you understand yourself. As you grow, you add chapters, triumphs, heartbreaks, betrayals, discoveries. These moments don't simply exist in memory. They're woven into a plotline with meaning, cause, and consequence. And that meaning is powerful. It tells you not just what happened, but what kind of person you are because of it. This narrative instinct is not a flaw. It's a feature of the human mind. Psychologists call humans storytelling animals, because we make sense of everything from the cosmos to our morning routines by embedding it in a narrative structure. The brain craves coherence. A chaotic series of events becomes bearable when stitched into a storyline. Pain becomes purpose. Randomness becomes destiny. Coincidence becomes fate. Without stories, life would feel fragmented and meaningless. But there's a cost to this craving for coherence. We begin to mistake the tale for the truth. Consider how you explain your own life to yourself. Perhaps you believe you're resilient because you overcame hardship, or unlucky because everything seems to go wrong. Perhaps you see yourself as kind because of the times you helped others, or unworthy because of mistakes you made long ago. These conclusions feel like self-knowledge, but they are interpretations, not facts. Another person with the same past could tell a completely different story and arrive at a completely different identity. And once a story is told often enough, it becomes self-reinforcing. If you think of yourself as the reliable one, you'll seek situations that confirm that identity and avoid those that don't. If your story is, I'm always abandoned, you'll interpret neutral events as evidence of rejection. This is known as the narrative bias. We selectively notice, remember, and interpret information that fits the story we've built about ourselves, and in doing so, we dig the illusion deeper. The self becomes less a living process and more a fixed script. Even more insidiously, many of these stories aren't written by us at all. They're inherited from parents, culture, religion, and society. They tell us what success should look like, what love should feel like, what paths are normal and which are wrong. We internalize these narratives without question, and they quietly shape our decisions, preferences, and identities. The result is a life that often feels chosen, even though much of it was scripted, long before we were aware enough to choose anything at all. Think about how language reflects this. We speak of finding ourselves as if there's a hidden, pre-written story buried somewhere waiting to be uncovered. But perhaps the more unsettling truth is that there's nothing to find, only stories we continue to tell. And when those stories change, the self changes too. Someone who once said, "I'm not creative," may with a new narrative become an artist. Someone who believed, "I'm unlovable," may through different experiences rewrite that story entirely. If the self were truly real, a permanent, unchanging core, such transformations would be impossible. This realization can be terrifying or liberating, depending on how you approach it. Terrifying because it means the you've spent a lifetime building might be nothing more than a story, one version of many possible selves that could have existed. Liberating because it means that story is not destiny. It can be rewritten. The narrator can change their mind mid-sentence. The protagonist can choose a different ending, and in that rewriting lies the possibility of freedom. The danger is that most people never realize they're telling a story. They believe the plot is real, the character fixed, the arc predetermined. They don't see how much power they have over the narrative, or how much the narrative has over them. They become trapped in loops of self-definition. I can't do this because I'm not that kind of person. I'll never succeed because I always fail. I don't deserve love because I never have. These aren't truths. They're stories mistaken for truths. And they shape lives more deeply than any objective fact ever could. What's left when the story is stripped away? Without the plotline of memory, labels, and meaning, the self begins to dissolve. There's no hero or villain, no before or after, no me or them. There is only awareness, experience unfolding in the present moment, without narrative scaffolding. And in that raw presence, the illusion becomes obvious. The self was never more than a story told by a mind desperate to make sense of itself. If the self is indeed a story, then every belief you hold about who you are is negotiable. Every limitation is a chapter, not a law. And the most radical act you can perform might not be to discover who you are, but to stop telling the story altogether and see what remains in the silence that follows. When you look in the mirror, you see a face staring back, familiar, recognizable, a physical anchor for the story you call me. That face carries your expressions, reveals your emotions, ages with your years, and behind it, you believe, lies the real you, the authentic self that others can't see. Yet if you peel back the layers of who you present to the world, you may find that what you think is you is often just a mask, one worn so long and so convincingly that you've forgotten it's there. From the earliest moments of childhood, you learn to wear masks. As a baby, you cry to get attention, not because you're manipulative, but because you instinctively sense that certain behaviors bring comfort. As a child, you discover that smiling earns praise, obedience brings approval, and rebellion brings punishment. Slowly, you begin to shape yourself to fit the expectations of those around you. You adopt roles, the good student, the dutiful child, the funny friend, not because they reflect a fixed inner self, but because they are rewarded. These roles are the earliest masks. As you grow older, the masks multiply. You wear one at work, another with family, a third with friends. You present confidence, even when you feel uncertain. You hide your anger to seem kind, your sadness to seem strong, your confusion to seem intelligent. None of this is inherently wrong. It's part of how humans navigate social life. But over time, the line between performance and identity blurs. You start to believe that the masks are you. Sociologists call this impression management, the ongoing effort to shape how others perceive us. It's deeply human and deeply necessary. But the problem arises when we become trapped by the personas we create. We curate our lives to maintain an image, censor our desires to protect a reputation, and suppress our true thoughts because they don't match the version of ourselves we've shown the world. The longer we do this, the more the mask hardens, until even we can no longer tell where performance ends and authenticity begins. Think about how many versions of you exist. There's the version you show your parents, the one your friends know, the one your colleagues see, and the one you keep entirely to yourself. Are they all equally you, or are they fragments? Performance is tailored to different stages and audiences. And if each version is slightly different, which one is the real you? The uncomfortable answer might be none of them. They are all roles played by consciousness in response to circumstance. Even the private self, the one you believe is most authentic, may be a mask. It's built from ideas you've absorbed about what a real person should think, feel, or desire. It's shaped by the culture you live in, the media you consume, the ideals you aspire to. What you call your true self might simply be the most deeply internalized performance. The one you no longer realize is a performance at all. Psychology has long noted this phenomenon. Carl Jung called the social self the persona, a mask the ego presents to the world to function within society. but he also warned that identifying too strongly with the persona leads to alienation from deeper layers of the psyche. You begin to live for appearances rather than experience, for validation rather than truth. In the pursuit of being someone, you lose contact with the raw, unfiltered awareness that exists before identity. This mask-wearing extends beyond individuals. Entire cultures operate as collective performances. We adopt shared scripts about success, beauty, morality, and meaning. We conform to norms not because they reflect some inherent truth, but because belonging depends on playing the part. And while these performances make society possible, they also reinforce the illusion that there's a fixed self underneath them, a core actor donning different costumes. But what if there is no actor? What if there are only costumes, endlessly shifting, with nothing solid beneath? The implications are profound. If the self is just a series of roles responding to context, then much of what we fear, judgment, rejection, humiliation, loses its weight. If there's no fixed identity to defend, failure is just a costume that didn't fit, not a condemnation of who you are. And if identity is fluid, then transformation is always possible. You are not bound to yesterday's mask. You can put it down and walk away. Yet, most people never do. They cling to their masks because they believe without them, they will disappear. But the opposite is true. It is only when the masks fall away that you begin to see what remains, a silent awareness beneath the performance, untouched by applause or criticism, existing before any name or story. This realization is not about rejecting society or refusing all roles. It's about recognizing that the roles are just that, roles. They are tools for navigating the world, not prisons to live in. When you stop mistaking the mask for the face beneath it, you stop confusing performance with essence. And in that space of clarity, the illusion of a singular, enduring self begins to dissolve. Perhaps there was never an actor behind the masks, only the play itself, unfolding moment by moment, costume by costume, and perhaps that's enough. If memory builds the scaffolding of the self and story gives it structure, then language is the paint that makes it visible, the tool that allows this phantom to name itself, describe itself, and believe in its own existence. Without language, the idea of I might never have been born. It is language that turns fleeting experiences into fixed identities, that transforms shifting states of consciousness into the illusion of a permanent self. And like most powerful illusions, it works so well because we never stop to question it. From our first moments learning to speak, we are taught to frame the world in terms of subjects and objects. I want, I feel, I am. This grammatical structure is so ingrained that we mistake it for reality itself. The subject, I, appears as the stable anchor around which all action revolves. The verb shows what I does, the object reveals what I interacts with. And just like that, a complex, fluid, ever-changing field of experience is carved into a neat story, a self acting in a world of things. But language doesn't just describe experience, it shapes it. Cognitive scientists call this the linguistic relativity hypothesis. The structure of our language influences how we perceive and conceptualize reality. When every sentence you speak requires a subject, you begin to assume that a subject must always exist. The I becomes not just a grammatical necessity, but an existential one, and soon the mind cannot imagine thought, feeling, or perception happening without someone to own them. Consider how different your experience would be if your language lacked the word I. Some languages, such as certain forms of classical Chinese or Sanskrit, can express events without explicit subjects. Rather than saying, I feel sad, the sentence might translate to something like sadness arises. This subtle shift changes everything. It removes the illusion of ownership, revealing emotion as a passing phenomenon rather than a property of a permanent self. But in English and most modern languages, the I is unavoidable. Even when we meditate or attempt self-inquiry, the habit persists. I am trying to let go. I am searching for truth. I am aware. The self sneaks back in through syntax. Language also gives us labels, and labels become prisons. The moment you describe yourself, introvert, extrovert, kind, lazy, intelligent, broken, you confine a vast dynamic being into a narrow definition. These words are meant to clarify, but they solidify instead. They reduce infinite possibility to a fixed identity, and soon the label becomes a lens. If you believe I am anxious, every sensation of unease confirms it. If you decide I am confident, every moment of doubt threatens it. The self clings to these verbal identities, even when they cause suffering, because they offer a sense of solidity in a constantly changing world. Language doesn't just name who we think we are, it also constructs the boundaries between self and other. Words like me, mine, yours, and theirs carve reality into categories, drawing lines that don't exist outside of thought. There is no clear physical border between your breath and the air around you, no fixed boundary where your consciousness ends and the world begins. Yet language insists there is, and once these linguistic distinctions are in place, they feel natural, even obvious. Philosophers have long recognized this. Ludwig Wittgenstein famously argued that the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. In other words, we don't just use language to describe our inner reality. Language is our inner reality. The concept of a self is sustained not just by memory or story, but by the endless repetition of words that imply its existence. The illusion persists because we keep naming it. But this realization is not merely philosophical. It has practical consequences. Consider moments when language stops: deep meditation, intense emotion, profound shock. In those rare instances, the internal narrator falls silent. Thoughts dissolve, words lose their grip, and yet experience continues. Awareness doesn't vanish when the word I disappears. In fact, it often becomes clearer, more expansive, more direct. What vanishes is the illusion of a separate entity, observing that experience. Even science reflects this paradox. Studies on preverbal infants suggest that a stable sense of self, as something distinct from the environment, emerges only after language development begins. Before that, the baby exists in a fluid state of sensation, without clear boundaries between self and world. In a sense, the ego is a linguistic artifact, a byproduct of naming, describing, and narrating. None of this means language is harmful. It is one of humanity's most extraordinary tools, allowing us to share ideas, build civilizations, and explore the universe. But it's also a double-edged sword. The same tool that enables understanding can also imprison it. When we forget that I is just a word, a symbol pointing to an ever-shifting field of experience, we mistake the symbol for the thing itself. The path to seeing through this illusion is not to abandon language but to see its limits. Notice how often your thoughts begin with I. Notice how language makes ownership out of what is simply happening. Notice how words turn flowing experience into static identity. With enough awareness, you may begin to glimpse the truth beneath the words. There is no fixed self, only awareness, timeless and nameless, in which language rises and falls like waves on an ocean. And when the chatter of I finally fades, even for a moment, what's left isn't absence. It's something far more profound, a vast, silent presence that was never bound by words at all. There's a voice in your head, a constant commentator narrating every moment of your life. It labels what you see, judges what you do, worries about the future, replays the past, and tells stories about who you are. It has opinions, fears, ambitions, regrets, and because it's always there, because it speaks in the first person, you assume it's you. But here's the unsettling truth. That voice isn't who you are. It's just thought, a stream of mental activity pretending to be a self. This assumption, that the thinker and the self are the same, is one of the deepest illusions the mind creates. It begins early, as language develops. Inner speech becomes internalized. The external words of parents, teachers and peers turn inward, shaping an internal monologue that runs almost without interruption. Over time, that monologue becomes the soundtrack of consciousness. And because it uses the word I, you believe it's speaking from the core of your being. But thought is not identity. Thought is an event, a movement of the mind, arising and fading like waves on the surface of awareness. If you sit quietly and watch, you'll see this clearly. Thoughts appear, often uninvited, and disappear without effort. They come from nowhere and dissolve into nothing. Yet you don't decide their arrival, you don't choose their content. They happen. And yet, the moment they arise, the illusion begins. I am thinking. A thought appears about being late to work, and suddenly you say, I'm anxious. A thought judges someone's behavior, and you conclude, I'm angry. But in truth, there is no thinker doing the thinking, only thought happening. This is more than a philosophical claim. Neuroscience supports it. Brain activity linked to thoughts can often be detected before we're consciously aware of them. The sense of, I decided to think that is a retrospective story, the mind taking ownership of something that has already occurred. This is known as the illusion of agency, the tendency to attribute control to the self even when none exists, and it extends far beyond thoughts. We believe I initiate actions, I make choices, I control outcomes, when in reality most of these processes unfold automatically, guided by biology, conditioning, and circumstance. Thought is persuasive because it mimics the voice of the self. It says, I and me, with such authority that questioning it feels impossible. But if you examine the voice closely, you'll see its inconsistencies. It contradicts itself, changes its mind, argues with itself. One moment it tells you you're capable and strong. The next, it insists you're worthless. Which version is the real you? The truth is neither, because the self that thought describes doesn't exist independently of the thoughts themselves. This realization is liberating, but also deeply unsettling. We're taught to trust our thoughts, to believe that our inner monologue is a faithful representation of reality, but much of what thought says is biased, repetitive, and false. It projects fears that never manifest, replays regrets that no longer matter, and weaves narratives from random events. It creates enemies out of strangers, disasters out of possibilities, identities out of stories, and because we mistake thought for self, we suffer unnecessarily, chained to the rise and fall of ideas that have no substance. Spiritual traditions have long recognized this. In Zen Buddhism, practitioners are taught to observe thoughts without attaching to them, to see them as clouds passing through the sky of awareness. In Advaita Vedanta, the classic instruction is neti neti, not this, not that, a reminder that whatever can be observed, including thoughts, cannot be the observer itself. Even Western philosophy echoes this idea. Descartes famously declared, I think, therefore I am, but perhaps a more accurate statement would be, thought occurs, therefore awareness is. When you begin to notice thoughts as events rather than identity, the illusion starts to unravel. You realize that you are not the one who thinks. You are the space in which thinking happens, and in that space, thought loses its authority. It still arises, but it no longer defines you. Worry may still come, but it is simply worry, not my worry. Anger may still appear, but it is simply anger, not my anger. The stories lose their stickiness. This doesn't mean thoughts are useless. They're essential tools for planning, analyzing, creating, and communicating. The problem is not thought itself, it's identification with thought. When you believe every idea the mind produces, you become its prisoner. When you see thought as a phenomenon, you become its witness. And a witness is free. Over time, this shift changes everything. The endless stream of commentary that once felt so personal begins to sound like background noise, weather patterns passing through the sky of consciousness. You stop clinging to every idea about who you are, what you must do, what might go wrong. The silence beneath thought, vast, peaceful, unchanging, becomes more apparent. And in that silence, the illusion of a thinker fades, revealing something deeper and more stable, awareness itself, untouched by the stories it contains. The voice in your head will keep talking. That's its nature. But once you see that it's not you, it loses its power to define you. And when that happens, the entire structure of the self begins to tremble. Because without thought to anchor it, the self has nowhere to stand. You wake up in the morning, stretch your arms, look down, and think, this is me. The hands that move when you command them. The face reflected back at you in the mirror. The familiar sensations of hunger, warmth, or pain. All of it seems to prove beyond doubt that your body and yourself are one and the same. But if you follow that certainty to its foundations, you'll find it resting on sand. Because just like thoughts, stories, and language, the body too is part of the illusion. It's not the you think it is. It's something happening to you, not something you are. At first glance, this might sound absurd. How could the body not be the self? It is, after all, the vessel that carries you through the world. Yet look closer, and cracks begin to appear. For one thing, the body is constantly changing. So much so that, biologically speaking, you are not even the same collection of matter you were a decade ago. Your cells are replaced, your bones are renewed, your skin sheds and regenerates. Even the molecules in your bloodstream are exchanged every few months. And yet, despite this ongoing transformation, you continue to believe there's a continuous me hiding somewhere beneath the flux. This belief reveals the first illusion, that continuity equals identity. We assume that because the body persists as a recognizable form, it must contain an unchanging self. But the persistence of a pattern is not proof of a permanent entity. A flame, too, appears constant, yet its fuel is always changing. A river flows endlessly, but no drop of water remains the same. The body is no different. It's a living process, not a fixed object. Even the control you think you have over your body is more limited than it seems. Your heart beats without your permission. Your stomach digests without your supervision. Your cells repair themselves without your involvement. You breathe automatically, blink involuntarily, and regulate temperature unconsciously. Most of what your body does, the very processes that sustain your life, happen without any participation from the you who claims ownership. And yet, the illusion persists. I am doing this. I am my body. But if you truly were your body, what would happen when it changes? Consider the example of amputation. A person may lose a limb, but they do not say, I am less myself. Their sense of identity remains intact. If the body were the self, losing part of it would mean losing part of you. Instead, the self persists as if nothing essential has changed. Similarly, organ transplants, even heart transplants, don't alter a person's identity. You are not less you after receiving someone else's kidney. This suggests that identity is not housed in flesh and bone. Even the boundaries of the body are not as fixed as they seem. Neuroscientists have demonstrated this through experiments like the rubber hand illusion, where a fake hand is placed in front of a participant and stroked in sync with their hidden real hand. Within minutes, many participants begin to feel as though the rubber hand is part of their body. Their brain updates its internal map of self based on sensory input, proof that the body's boundaries are flexible, even negotiable. This flexibility extends to more subtle levels. In virtual reality, people can embody avatars with entirely different shapes, sizes, even species, and still feel a sense of ownership over those bodies. Paraplegic patients using robotic limbs can integrate those artificial extensions into their sense of self. These examples reveal a startling fact: the brain's concept of my body is a mental model, not an immutable truth. It can expand, contract, and adapt depending on circumstance, which means it cannot be the ultimate foundation of who you are. The mind also blurs the line between body and world more than we realize. When you pick up a tool, a hammer, a tennis racket, even a smartphone, your brain begins to treat it as an extension of your body. It incorporates it into its internal map of physical space, reacting as though the tool were part of you. This is why a skilled driver can feel the edges of their car, or a blind person can sense through their cane. The body, then, is not a fixed container, but an adaptable boundary, a shifting interface between consciousness and environment. And yet, despite all this, we continue to cling to the illusion that the body defines us. We fear its decay, obsess over its appearance, and panic at the thought of its death, because we equate its end with the end of us. But if the body is not the self, then death might not be the annihilation we fear. It may simply be the dissolution of a vessel that never truly contained us in the first place. This isn't to deny the body's importance. It is the vehicle through which experience happens, the doorway through which awareness engages with the physical world, but it is not the driver. It is not the awareness itself. When you stop identifying so tightly with the body, you begin to see it for what it is, a temporary expression of something far deeper, something that doesn't come and go with every heartbeat. The body is not the self. It's a costume worn by awareness, a mask shaped by nature, time and circumstance. And when you no longer mistake the costume for the actor, the illusion begins to fade, revealing the vastness of what you truly are beneath the skin. Imagine a sky, vast, unbound and empty, in which clouds drift and dissolve, storms gather and pass, light and shadow play their endless games. Now imagine someone pointing at a particular cloud and saying, "That's the sky." It's a category mistake, of course. The sky isn't any one of the things that appear within it. It isn't the clouds, the rain, the wind, or the sunlight. It's the boundless space that holds them all. And yet that's exactly what we do when we confuse awareness with the self. Most of us move through life, believing there's a central point within us, a thinker behind the thoughts, a feeler behind the feelings, a watcher sitting somewhere behind the eyes. We imagine awareness radiating outward from that center, perceiving the world and acting upon it. But if you go looking for this center, you'll discover that it's not there. Awareness exists, but it has no fixed point, no location, no shape. It's not in the body, not in the brain, not behind anything. It simply is. You can begin to see this by paying close attention to experience itself. Right now, as you read these words, perceptions are happening. Sights, sounds, bodily sensations, thoughts, emotions. They appear effortlessly. You don't summon them, you don't create them, you don't control their coming or going. Yet they arise within a field of awareness that never seems to move. Everything in experience changes, but the capacity to be aware of change does not. That awareness is not owned. It's not located anywhere in particular. It's not inside you or outside you. It's simply present, silent, open, and centerless. This centerless nature of awareness becomes even clearer when you try to find the one who is aware. Close your eyes and look inward. Where is the observer? Is it in your head? In your chest? Can you locate it behind your thoughts or beneath your feelings? If you look carefully, all you'll find are more sensations, more thoughts, more experiences, each arising within awareness, but none of them being awareness itself. The I you expect to find turns out to be just another appearance. And appearances, by definition, are not the thing they appear within. This is a central insight of many contemplative traditions. In Buddhism, it's called anatta, no self. The idea is not that nothing exists, but that awareness is not a personal possession. It's not something you have. Rather, the you is something that appears within awareness. Just as waves are not separate from the ocean, thoughts and sensations are not separate from the field that knows them. The sense of a center is itself a passing event, a thought, a feeling, a story, arising and fading within something far more spacious. Neuroscience offers a parallel insight. Brain imaging shows that no single center of consciousness exists. Awareness doesn't originate from one region or structure. Instead, it seems to emerge from the dynamic interaction of many processes, sensory inputs, attention networks, memory systems, none of which alone can explain the experience of being aware. This suggests that consciousness is not a thing located somewhere. It's a condition, a field, a state without a fixed origin. And yet, the illusion of a center is persistent because it's comforting. It provides a sense of control and identity. A self feels like an anchor in a chaotic world, a place from which we act and to which we return. But this comfort comes at a cost. It blinds us to the reality of awareness as it truly is. When we insist that awareness belongs to someone, we divide the world into subject and object, self and other, inside and outside. We cut infinity into pieces and mistake one of those pieces for the whole. But when the illusion of a center dissolves, even briefly, something profound happens. Experience becomes less about me seeing the tree and more about seeing happening, less about I am sad and more about sadness arising. The world ceases to revolve around a fictional core and begins to unfold as a seamless whole. The subject-object divide softens. The boundaries between self and world blur. What remains is simply awareness, vast, centerless, without beginning or end, in which all experiences rise and fall like waves on an endless sea. This shift doesn't erase individuality. Your preferences, memories, and personality still exist, but they're no longer mistaken for a central controller. They're seen as patterns, temporary configurations in the field of awareness. Just as clouds are expressions of the sky but not the sky itself, thoughts, feelings, and actions are expressions of awareness but not its source. And here lies one of the greatest paradoxes. The less you cling to a center, the more fully you can live. Without a rigid self to defend, there's nothing to prove, nothing to protect, nothing to lose. Life simply unfolds, moment by moment, and awareness meets it all, without fear, without resistance, without the need to control. You are not the point at the center of awareness. You are not even the awareness itself in the possessive sense. You are awareness, boundless, borderless, and centerless. And once you see that clearly, the illusion of a small, separate self collapses like a shadow at noon. One of the most enduring assumptions in human consciousness is the idea that there's someone inside looking out, a central witness, a watcher perched behind the eyes, observing the world go by. We refer to this invisible presence as me, myself, the observer. It seems stable and separate, like the screen on which the movie of life plays out. But if you examine that sense of being an observer closely, not philosophically but directly, in the raw immediacy of experience, you'll discover something strange. The observer itself can be observed, and once you see that, the illusion begins to unravel. The idea of an inner witness is appealing, because it promises continuity. Thoughts change, emotions rise and fall, the body ages and decays, but the one who sees all of this feels unchanging. It's the subtle voice that says, I am still here, no matter what else shifts. And yet, if you try to locate this I, to point to the observer itself, you quickly find that it's just another object appearing within awareness. Try it now. Turn your attention inward and search for the watcher. Where is it? Can you find its shape, its size, its location? Does it have a voice, a color, a boundary? The moment you think, here it is, Notice what has happened. You've identified a thought, a sensation, or an image about the observer, but not the observer itself. Whatever you point to, you can observe, and if it can be observed, it cannot be the one observing. This realization is subtle but profound. It means that the sense of I as the witness is not the foundation of awareness. It is another appearance within awareness. Just like thoughts, feelings, or sensations, the observer arises and fades. It is a construction, a mental representation of someone at the center of experience, but it is not that center itself. In fact, there is no center. Neuroscience offers compelling evidence for this. Brain scans show that the feeling of being a self, a continuous observer, is associated with certain networks, particularly the default mode network. But these networks are not always active. They switch off during deep meditation, intense focus, or moments of awe, and yet awareness remains. Experience still happens. Perception still occurs. In those moments, the sense of I am watching simply isn't there, revealing that the observer is not essential to awareness. It's a byproduct, not a prerequisite. The illusion persists because the mind conflates awareness with ownership. It doesn't just register what's happening, it claims it. I see this, I feel that, I am thinking. But just as the body's processes unfold without a self, the heart beats, the lungs expand, the stomach digests. Perception unfolds without a perceiver. Seeing happens. Hearing happens. Awareness happens. There is no little person pulling levers behind the eyes. This has been a cornerstone of non-dual philosophy for centuries. Advaita Vedanta, for instance, teaches that the true nature of consciousness is beyond subject and object. It is not the observer or the observed, but the ground in which both appear. Zen masters often pose the question, who is it that hears? At first the answer seems obvious, I do, but when you look for that I you find nothing, only hearing itself, existing before any claim of ownership. Even psychology hints at this truth. The observer we feel inside is often a composite, a blend of memories, cultural conditioning, internalized voices, and cognitive patterns. It's not a single entity, but a shifting constellation of mental activity, and because it changes over time, maturing, evolving, contradicting itself, it cannot be the timeless, unchanging self we assume it to be. This is where the illusion becomes most paradoxical. The very thing you believe to be the subject, the one doing the observing, is itself an object. The witness you thought was separate from the world turns out to be part of the same play it was supposedly watching. The spotlight turns around and illuminates itself, revealing there was never a someone holding it in the first place. The implications are staggering. If the observer can be observed, then the duality between subject and object collapses. There is no me looking at the world. There is only perception, seamless, centerless, unowned. The tree outside the window, the breath moving through your lungs, the thought rising in your mind, all of it is part of a single, undivided field of awareness. The line between watcher and watched was an illusion drawn by thought. When this realization dawns, even fleetingly, experience becomes radically intimate. The sense of separation dissolves. Instead of you observing the world, there is just observing. Instead of you being aware of life, there is just awareness. Life stops being something happening to you and reveals itself as something happening as you. And perhaps, in the deepest sense, that's what you've always been searching for, not a self to defend or a witness to strengthen, but the recognition that there was never anyone behind the eyes at all. There was only seeing, only being, only this, and it was whole from the very beginning. For most of your life, you've assumed that consciousness, that luminous field of experience in which everything appears, is yours. It belongs to you. It's your awareness, your thoughts, your feelings. And yet, this belief contains a hidden contradiction. The very thing you call yours has never been under your control. You didn't choose for it to exist. You can't switch it off at will, and you don't decide what enters it. Consciousness isn't something you possess. It's something that is, and it exists without anyone to own it. This illusion of ownership is perhaps the most persistent of all. It's so woven into language and culture that it goes unquestioned. We speak of my mind, my body, my awareness, as if there's a separate entity standing behind these things, holding them like possessions. But if you look closely, that owner is nowhere to be found. The mind functions whether you want it to or not. Thoughts appear without your permission. Emotions surge and subside without your command. Sensory perceptions flood in without your invitation. Everything you claim as mine unfolds spontaneously, independent of any internal controller. This is easiest to see in the realm of thought. If consciousness truly belonged to you, you'd have complete authority over its contents, but you don't decide what your next thought will be. It simply appears. You don't schedule your worries or summon your distractions. They arrive uninvited, linger as long as they please, and leave without notice. And yet, as soon as they arise, the illusion begins. I am thinking. My mind is busy. The self steps in after the fact, taking credit for something it never did. The same is true of sensation. You don't choose to hear the sounds around you. They enter awareness on their own. You don't decide to feel the texture of the chair beneath you. That sensation arises whether you want it to or not. Even attention, which seems under deliberate control, often shifts involuntarily. A sudden noise captures it. A stray memory hijacks it. A passing emotion redirects it. Consciousness behaves less like property, and more like weather, arising, changing and fading according to conditions far beyond your control. This isn't just philosophical speculation. Neuroscientific research supports it. Studies show that neural activity associated with decisions can be detected milliseconds, even seconds, before a person becomes aware of choosing. Consciousness doesn't seem to be issuing commands. It's more like a stage on which events appear. The brain acts, and then awareness narrates, claiming ownership after the fact. This pattern repeats across every domain of experience. You don't own the body's functions. The heart beats, the lungs draw air, the cells replicate. None of it requires you. You don't own the external world. The sun rises and sets, seasons shift, stars explode, all indifferent to your preferences. And you don't even own the consciousness that knows all of this. Awareness was here before you were born, and will remain, long after the concept of you dissolves. It is not yours. It is what is. This idea, that consciousness is impersonal, is central to many contemplative traditions. In Advaita Vedanta, consciousness chit is described as the ground of all experience, not as a possession but as the essence of reality itself. In Buddhism, the notion of anatta no-self points to the same truth. Awareness is not owned, because the owner is a fiction. Even modern cognitive science hints at it, suggesting that the self may be nothing more than the brain's model of agency, a useful but inaccurate representation of what's really happening. The mind resists this conclusion because ownership gives us a sense of control. If consciousness is mine, then I can shape it, guide it, use it. If it's not, then I am adrift in something vast and indifferent. But this fear is misplaced. The absence of ownership is not disempowering, it's liberating. When you stop believing that you control consciousness, you stop trying to control every thought, feeling and experience. They are no longer threats to you because there is no you to threaten. They're simply phenomena arising in awareness, doing what they do. This shift also transforms how we relate to suffering. Most psychological pain stems from identification, the belief that negative thoughts or feelings belong to us. I am anxious. I am broken. I am worthless. But if consciousness is not yours, those experiences are no longer personal. They are weather passing through the sky of awareness. Intense perhaps, but temporary and impersonal. This doesn't make suffering vanish, but it removes its sting. The storm still rages, but there's no self standing in its path. Ultimately, the idea that consciousness belongs to someone is as absurd as saying the ocean belongs to a single wave. Waves rise and fall, take shape and disappear, but the ocean remains, vast, boundless, unaffected. You are not the owner of consciousness. You are not even a part of it in the way a hand is part of a body. You are the whole field, the space in which everything arises and dissolves. Once you see this clearly, the illusion of ownership collapses. The possessive pronouns, my mind, my awareness, my life, lose their grip. What's left is far more expansive, consciousness without edges, without borders, without anyone behind it. And in that vastness, the idea of a separate self, fragile, fearful, desperate to hold on, dissolves like a shadow at dusk. Every morning, when you wake up, you slip back into a story already in progress. You remember who you are, where you live, what your past has been, and what you expect the future to bring. These memories and expectations form a continuous thread, a narrative that ties together yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And because that thread seems unbroken, you assume there's a single enduring self traveling along it. But here's the truth, that continuity isn't proof of a self, it's a function of time. Without time, the you believe in would fall apart. The self is, at its core, a temporal construction. It depends on memory to stretch backward and on anticipation to stretch forward. Strip away these two dimensions, and all that's left is the present moment, a field of raw experience without a character at its center. You may still think, feel, and perceive, but there's no story tying those experiences together. And without a story, identity begins to dissolve. Think about what it means to say, I am. Implicit in that statement is a timeline. I was this in the past, I will be that in the future. Even the most basic sense of self, I am the same person who woke up this morning, relies on the mind stitching together a series of moments and calling them a single life. But the stitching is not reality. It's a narrative overlay, a way of organizing fleeting experiences into a coherent whole. Neuroscience offers compelling evidence for how deeply time shapes identity. The brain's default mode network, responsible for constructing a sense of self, is also heavily involved in autobiographical memory and future simulation. In other words, the same neural machinery that tells the story of me is the machinery that moves backward and forward in time. When people experience disruptions to this network, through injury, illness, or deep meditation, their sense of self often weakens or disappears entirely. Without a temporal narrative, the I loses its anchor. Our dependence on time is evident in how we think about ourselves. We define identity through a timeline where we came from, what we've achieved, what we plan to do. We imagine a past self that we've grown from, and a future self we're striving toward. We speak of becoming better versions of ourselves, language that makes no sense without time. But who is that self that supposedly persists through change? The child you once were no longer exists. The person you'll be in 10 years does not yet exist. The only thing that exists now is this, a constantly shifting field of awareness. Everything else is memory and imagination. The illusion deepens because memory and anticipation don't just shape our understanding of self, they shape our very experience of reality. Memory tells us who we were and informs our reactions to the present. Anticipation tells us what we want and directs our choices. Together, they give life its apparent continuity. But this continuity is psychological, not actual. The present moment, the only moment that ever truly exists, has no duration. It is always now. The past is a recollection arising in the present. The future is a projection imagined in the present. The self, too, is a thought appearing in the present. One more story woven from the threads of time. Consider how fragile this temporal construction is. People suffering from severe amnesia often lose their sense of identity entirely. Without access to their past, they no longer know who they are. Similarly, if you were to lose the ability to imagine the future, your sense of self would shrink to the immediate moment. This shows that the I you defend so fiercely is not an inherent property of consciousness. It's a product of temporal awareness. Even more revealing is what happens when our perception of time changes. During deep meditation, intense flow states, or moments of crisis, time can seem to stop. In those timeless spaces, the self often loosens or disappears altogether. People describe feeling vast, boundaryless, even selfless, as if they've merged with the present moment. And when they return, they struggle to explain the experience because the language of I presupposes time. But perhaps the most profound realization comes from recognizing how much suffering is tied to the temporal self. We regret the past, fear the future, and build our identities around both. We carry guilt for who we were, and anxiety about who we might become, yet neither of those selves truly exists. They are shadows cast by the mind's need for continuity, and in clinging to them, we miss the only thing that is real, the present. This doesn't mean we should abandon time altogether. Planning, remembering, and learning are essential for survival. But when we mistake the temporal story for reality, we trap ourselves in it. We become prisoners of a fictional timeline, dragging the weight of the past and future into a moment that never stops renewing itself. The truth is, there is no you moving through time. There is only time, or rather the illusion of it, moving through awareness. And in each moment, a new self arises, fresh and unconditioned, before memory claims it as part of a continuous story. When you see this clearly, the identity you've clung to begins to loosen. The I that seemed so permanent reveals itself as a narrative thread woven from moments that no longer exist, and moments that may never come. What remains is simple and profound awareness itself, untouched by time, eternal in its presence. And perhaps that, not the story stretching backward and forward, is what you've been all along. Who you believe yourself to be, your personality, your beliefs, your fears, your dreams, feels deeply personal, as though it has been authored from within. But look closely, and you'll notice that very little of you was ever chosen. From the language you speak to the values you hold, from the memories you cling to the biases you carry, nearly all of it was written long before you were aware of it. The past didn't just shape you, it built you. And once you see how thoroughly this is true, the illusion of a self that is independent, autonomous, and original begins to crack. Let's start with the most obvious. Your family. Before you took your first breath, decisions made by people you never met were already shaping who you would become. Your genetic inheritance, your temperament, your predispositions, your vulnerabilities, was handed to you by the past. The family you were born into determined the language you'd speak, the culture you'd absorb, the early beliefs you'd accept as unquestionable truths. The way you interpret love, safety, success, and even self-worth was scripted by interactions that happened before you could form conscious memory. As you grew, this script only deepened. Your earliest experiences etched neural pathways that would later define how you respond to the world. A comforting touch taught your nervous system trust. A sharp word taught it caution. Repeated praise reinforced certain behaviors, repeated criticism buried others. None of this was deliberate on your part. You didn't decide what kind of attachment style you'd develop, what fears would linger, or what narratives would shape your worldview. The past wrote them into your character long before you could say, "I am this way." Culture, too, plays an enormous role in writing the self. The society you're born into hands you a worldview, a set of assumptions about reality so deeply ingrained, they rarely feel like assumptions at all. It teaches you how to categorize people, what to value, what to fear, what to strive for. It shapes your political beliefs, moral instincts, aesthetic preferences, even the way you conceptualize time and space. If you'd been born in a different country, century, or even household, you'd likely be a completely different person, different language, different worldview, different self. The only thing that would remain constant is awareness itself. Even the personality traits you believe are uniquely yours, your confidence, your cynicism, your kindness, your ambition, are often echoes of past events. The confident person may simply be reenacting the safety and encouragement they received as a child. The cynic may be reenacting betrayal. The kind person may be replaying early lessons about empathy, while the ambitious one may be chasing validation they were once denied. These traits feel like choices, but they are often conditioned responses, habits carved into the psyche by experience. The same is true of your memories. The events you recall most vividly, the ones that shaped your identity, were not consciously chosen as the pillars of your story. They rose to prominence because they carried emotional weight, reinforced certain beliefs, or repeated often enough to become neural landmarks. And each time you recall them, you reshape them slightly, filtering them through the lens of who you think you are. In this way, the past doesn't just sit behind you, it actively rewrites you in the present. Consider too how much of your daily behavior is habitual, and how those habits were born. The way you brush your teeth, speak in conversation, respond to conflict, or even walk down the street is largely the product of repetition over time. Habits are the fossilized remains of past actions, patterns laid down by earlier versions of you, now playing out automatically, and yet you claim them as deliberate acts of a free and independent self. Even your sense of morality, that sacred compass that feels so intrinsic, is deeply historical. The things you consider good or bad are shaped by centuries of cultural evolution, by traditions you inherited rather than invented. The ethical codes you defend as personal convictions are, more often than not, collective narratives passed down through generations. All of this leads to an unsettling conclusion. The you reading these words is less an independent agent and more a living archive. You are the sum total of causes and conditions, biological, cultural, historical, reaching back long before your birth. The choices you make today are constrained by patterns established decades or centuries ago. Even the idea of free will begins to look suspicious when you realize how much of your decision-making machinery was built by forces outside your control. This doesn't mean you're powerless. Recognizing how much of you was written by the past can be the first step in loosening its grip. When you see a reaction for what it is, a learned pattern rather than an eternal truth, you create space for something new. When you understand that a belief is inherited rather than chosen, you gain the freedom to question it. When you realize that your sense of self is a historical artifact, you can begin to explore what remains when the story is stripped away. And that something the awareness that witnesses the conditioning, the presence that observes the past unfolding through you, is not written. It has no history, no origin, no narrative. It is the blank page upon which the story of you is written. And just as a page is never stained by the words printed on it, that awareness is untouched by the centuries of cause and effect that shaped the person you believe yourself to be. The past wrote you, yes, but you are not the writing, you are the page, and the page has always been blank. We spend most of our lives chasing someone who never arrives. We plan for them, sacrifice for them, worry about them, and dream on their behalf. This phantom is our future self, the person we believe we are becoming. They are wiser, stronger, more successful, more fulfilled. They will read more books, make better choices, fix our mistakes, and live the life we've been postponing. But there's a problem: that person does not exist. And worse still, they never will. The idea of a future self is one of the most persistent illusions the mind creates because it gives shape and direction to our lives. It lets us believe that our current struggles have purpose, that our choices matter, that we are headed somewhere. But when you look closely, this future you is nothing more than imagination, a story projected into a time that will never arrive. Consider this: every moment you've ever lived was once the future. The you imagined as a child, the grown-up with a job, a home, and responsibilities, is reading these words right now. And yet, you probably don't feel like the fully realized version of yourself you once envisioned. That idealized self always seems a little further ahead, just out of reach. The reason is simple. The future is not a destination you arrive at. It's a moving horizon that recedes as you approach. Neuroscientists have shown that the brain constructs mental models of the future using the same neural networks it uses for memory. In other words, imagining the future is just another way of remembering, except instead of reconstructing what happened, the mind is simulating what might happen. And just like memory, these simulations are often inaccurate, biased, and incomplete. They're stories, and stories by their nature are fiction. This fiction is so convincing because it feels deeply personal. We talk about my future as if it's an object we possess, something waiting for us just beyond the present moment. But the future is not a thing you have. It's an idea. It exists only as thoughts happening now. And those thoughts are not guarantees. They are guesses. The future is always imagined, never experienced. Our obsession with the future self shapes nearly everything we do. We delay joy because future me will appreciate it more. We tolerate misery because future me will benefit from this. We even suffer guilt and anxiety for that imaginary person's sake, trying to fix problems they will supposedly inherit. But all this effort is built on a misunderstanding. There will never be a you who lives in the future. There will only ever be this, the present moment, eternally renewing itself. Think about how drastically the future you changes over time. 10 years ago, you imagined a future self that probably looks nothing like who you are now. 10 years from now, the same will happen again. The self you think you're becoming is constantly rewritten by new experiences, new circumstances, new perspectives. It's like aiming for a target that moves every time you take a step. You never hit it, because it doesn't exist as a stable entity, only as a shifting idea in the present. Psychology backs this up. Studies on temporal self-continuity, the sense of connection between your present and future selves, show that most people see their future self as almost a different person. They attribute different beliefs, values, and preferences to that imagined self. And indeed, when the future becomes the present, people often feel disconnected from the plans and promises they once made. They say, "I was a different person back then," and they're right, they were. The I that made those decisions no longer exists. This doesn't mean planning is pointless, or that ambition is futile. It means that clinging to the illusion of a permanent future self distorts how we live. We postpone living fully, waiting for a self who never arrives. We place conditions on our happiness. I'll be content when I get there, forgetting that there is always just another here. And in the process, we miss the only time life ever actually happens now. Even the concept of becoming is a trap. Becoming implies a fixed destination, a final version of you waiting to be completed. But experience has no finish line. The process of growth is endless, and every version of you will be temporary. The future self is not a place you reach. It's a mirage that keeps you moving, step by step through an infinite present. The irony is that the freedom we seek in the future is already available now. The peace we hope to feel someday is possible in this very moment. The self we're trying to become is not hiding ahead of us. It's being created right here, with every thought, word, and action. Once you see that, the illusion begins to lose its hold. There is no future self waiting to be discovered, only the self you're expressing right now, and that self is constantly dissolving, changing and reforming in the present. Life is not a journey toward an imagined destination. It is a series of nows unfolding endlessly, each one complete in itself. The moment you stop chasing the ghost of who you think you're supposed to be, you make space to experience who you already are. If you pause for just a moment and drop every thought about the past and every anticipation of the future, what remains? There is breath, sensation, sound, and awareness. There is the hum of existence happening effortlessly, without permission, without a center, and yet, almost instantly, the mind tries to claim it. I am breathing, I am hearing, I am experiencing this moment. But this too is an illusion, because the present moment does not belong to anyone. It never has. We live most of our lives as if we are the authors of the present, as if time flows around us and reality unfolds for us. Every moment is described as mine, my life, my thoughts, my surroundings, my emotions. But look closer, and you'll see that the present is always happening by itself. The sun rises and sets without consulting your plans. Your body breathes, digests, heals, and ages without your involvement. Sounds appear in your awareness without being summoned. Even your thoughts, the very ones claiming ownership, arise and pass without your control. This illusion of ownership is deeply tied to the concept of self. To sustain the idea of me, the mind must claim what happens in the present as its own. But the truth is, life is unfolding whether you participate or not. Reality does not require your permission to exist. It doesn't wait for your consent to move forward. You can resist it, deny it, or ignore it. But the present will keep arriving moment after moment, untouched by your opinion. Consider something as simple as a sound. When a bird sings outside your window, the sound arises in consciousness. Did you create it? Did you summon it? Can you stop it mid-song? No. It appears, lingers, and fades on its own. The same is true for sensations, thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. They emerge and dissolve without a manager behind the scenes. They happen within awareness, but not because of a self. This becomes clearer when we examine moments of deep presence, those rare instances when we're fully absorbed in what's happening. In those moments, the sense of self often fades. Time seems to disappear. Action flows without effort. A painter lost in their work doesn't feel like I am painting. Painting is simply happening. A musician mid-performance doesn't think I am playing this note. The music seems to play itself. Even in ordinary moments, watching rain fall, listening to waves crash, or simply breathing deeply, the present can reveal itself as selfless. And yet, the ego always tries to return. It insists, I am present, I am aware, I am the one experiencing. But if you look carefully, you'll see that even these thoughts are just more events in the present, no different from the sounds, sensations, or breaths. They don't prove ownership. They arise within the same field as everything else. They are part of the happening, not proof of a doer. This insight is central to many spiritual traditions. In Zen, practitioners speak of no mind, a state where actions occur spontaneously, without a sense of a self doing them. Taoism describes wu-wei, or effortless action, where life flows naturally, without intervention. Even neuroscience echoes this truth. Studies of peak performance and flow states show that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain most associated with self-referential thought, often deactivates during moments of intense presence. Awareness remains, but the I disappears. What's most striking is that the present moment is always free of identity. The thought, I am sad, is a memory of sadness moments after it arises. The thought, I am happy, is a conceptualization layered on top of a fleeting feeling. The there appears only after the fact, trying to pin a label onto something that was already happening. In the raw immediacy of now, before the mind steps in, there is no owner, no label, no self. There is only experience unfolding. Understanding this changes how we live. It loosens the grip of control, softens the burden of self-importance, and reveals a deeper intimacy with reality. If the present isn't yours, then life stops being something you have to manage and becomes something you can witness. The world ceases to revolve around a fictional center and instead becomes a dance, a continuous flow of arising and passing, happening on its own. This realization can also dissolve suffering. Much of our pain arises from resistance, the belief that the present should be different because I want it to be. But if there is no owner, there is no one to resist. The rain isn't ruining your day, rain is simply falling. The traffic isn't wasting your time, movement is simply slowing. When ownership dissolves, so does the sense of conflict. Reality is free to be exactly as it is. Ultimately, the present moment has never belonged to you. It was here before you were born, it will continue after you're gone, and it flows effortlessly regardless of what you believe. The self's claim to it is like a wave claiming ownership of the ocean, a temporary shape insisting it is the whole, but the present is vaster than any claim, untouched by any identity, and when you stop trying to possess it, you don't lose anything. On the contrary, you gain everything, because you become one with what's always been here. The timeless unfolding of now. From the moment we're old enough to understand choice, we're told that our decisions define us. We're taught that we are the authors of our lives, captains steering the ship of destiny. Every action, we're told, is an expression of our will. But what if that cherished belief, the idea that I freely choose, is just another illusion propping up the story of the self? What if free will, as we commonly understand it, is not freedom at all, but the convincing performance of a puppet who doesn't know its own strings? The illusion of free will begins with the feeling of agency, the sensation that I am the one deciding. You feel hunger and choose what to eat. You see two paths and decide which to take. It's so automatic, so deeply ingrained, that questioning it feels absurd. And yet, neuroscience has repeatedly shown that decisions form in the brain before we are consciously aware of making them. In classic experiments by Benjamin Libet and others, brain activity predicting a choice appears hundreds of milliseconds, sometimes even seconds, before a person reports the conscious intention to act. The decision, in other words, happens before you decide. This gap between cause and awareness is crucial. It suggests that the conscious self is not the initiator of action but a narrator, arriving late to the story and claiming authorship after the fact. A decision arises unconsciously, and then the mind steps in to declare, I chose this. The puppet doesn't pull the strings. The strings move, and the puppet takes the credit. But the strings don't end in the brain. They stretch outward, into the vast web of conditions that shape every moment of our lives. Genetics, upbringing, culture, language, trauma, beliefs, habits, all of these factors influence our choices long before we're aware of them. You didn't choose your preferences any more than you chose your birthplace or your parents. You didn't decide to desire certain things or to fear others. Even your spontaneous decisions, the ones you feel most responsible for, emerge from a complex tangle of causes, stretching back far beyond your control. Imagine tracing any single decision. Say, choosing to speak a certain word in a conversation. That choice depended on your vocabulary, which depended on your education, which depended on your parents, who were shaped by their culture, which was shaped by history, which was shaped by countless events you had no hand in. At every step, what looks like your choice is the inevitable result of conditions you didn't choose. The deeper you look, the less space there is for a free, independent agent. Yet the illusion persists because the feeling of agency is so convincing. It's reinforced by language. I decided, I did this. By society, you are responsible for your actions, and by culture, you can be anything you choose to be. And to be clear, this illusion is not without purpose. It has evolutionary value. Believing in free will encourages accountability, planning, and cooperation. It keeps societies functioning and individuals motivated. But utility is not the same as truth. A map can guide you even if it isn't an accurate representation of the terrain. Philosophers have wrestled with this paradox for centuries. Determinists argue that every event, including human action, is the inevitable outcome of prior causes. Compatibilists suggest that even if free will is constrained, our ability to act according to our desires still counts as freedom, though those desires themselves are conditioned. Existentialists, meanwhile, claim that freedom lies in how we respond to the circumstances we inherit, even if we didn't choose them. Yet, across these debates, one thing remains constant: the chooser is far less free than it appears. Even in moments that feel deeply intentional, acts of courage, creativity, or sacrifice, the same principle applies. Those actions arise from personality traits, emotional impulses, moral frameworks, and situational pressures that were themselves shaped by forces beyond conscious control. The heroic decision to risk one's life for another might be rooted in an upbringing that valued altruism, a temperament inclined toward empathy, or a genetic predisposition toward certain behaviors. None of these factors were chosen by the self. This realization can be unsettling. It challenges our notions of responsibility, morality, and even identity. If we are not truly the authors of our actions, who are we? But instead of leading to nihilism, this understanding can bring profound freedom. Recognizing the absence of free will doesn't mean we stop acting. It means we stop clinging to the illusion that we're isolated, autonomous actors. We see ourselves instead as part of an unfolding process, expressions of the universe responding to conditions rather than tiny gods controlling them. It also transforms how we see others. If our choices are conditioned, so are theirs. Anger, hatred, resentment. These often rest on the belief that people could have acted differently. But if their actions arose from a chain of causes beyond their control, compassion becomes the natural response. This doesn't mean excusing harm, but it reframes blame as understanding a recognition that behavior is not authored by isolated selves, but shaped by a vast web of circumstances. Ultimately, the belief in free will sustains the illusion of a separate self, a doer standing apart from the doing. But when you see through it, the illusion collapses. Action still happens. Choices still occur. Life still unfolds. But it does so without an owner, without a puppet master, without a tiny steering the ship. There is only the movement itself, spontaneous, inevitable, and profoundly free precisely because no one is controlling it. If free will is the engine that seems to drive the self, then desire is the fuel that keeps it running. It is the pulse beneath every plan, the spark behind every ambition, the quiet whisper behind every decision. I want. It shapes how we act, how we think, even how we see ourselves. But beneath its seductive pull lies a deeper truth. The self doesn't create desire. Desire creates the self, and without it, the illusion of me begins to unravel. From the moment we're born, desire pulls us forward. As infants, we reach for warmth, food, and comfort. As children, we crave approval and love. As adults, we pursue wealth, status, meaning, pleasure, or peace. These wants feel deeply personal, as if they arise from some inner core, yet, most of them are planted by forces far beyond our control. Biology gives us primal drives, to survive, to reproduce, to seek safety and stimulation. Culture layers on its own desires, to succeed, to belong, to achieve. Family, media, religion, and history all shape what we think we want, and once these desires take root, we mistake them for expressions of a self that chose them. But if you look closely, desire often precedes identity. We don't say, I am this kind of person, therefore I want these things. More often, it's the reverse. I want these things, therefore I must be this kind of person. A craving for success becomes the identity of an ambitious individual. A yearning for connection becomes the identity of a loyal friend. Even spiritual seekers, those who claim to transcend desire, are still driven by a desire for liberation. In every case, the self emerges as a narrative built around what is wanted. This mechanism is subtle but powerful. Desire creates a sense of continuity, a thread linking past, present, and future. It tells us who we were, I always wanted to write, who we are, I am a writer, and who we will become, I will write a great novel. It gives the illusion of direction, purpose, and agency. Without it, the story of the self begins to dissolve. Desire also reinforces the illusion of control. We say, I chose this, when in reality, the choice was often predetermined by what we wanted, and those wants were not chosen by us. We don't decide to crave food when hungry, or companionship when lonely, or validation when insecure. These impulses arise spontaneously, often unconsciously, and yet we build our identities around them. The self becomes a kind of middleman, a character claiming authorship over forces that existed long before it appeared. This dynamic is not just psychological, it's biological. Neuroscience shows that many of our desires are driven by deep, automatic reward circuits. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter most associated with motivation, surges not when we get what we want, but when we anticipate it. The thrill of pursuit, not the satisfaction of attainment, is what drives the cycle, and once the object of desire is achieved, the system resets, pushing us to want something new. This endless loop, craving, pursuit, fleeting satisfaction, renewed craving, is what keeps the illusion of a striving self alive. Spiritual traditions have long recognized this. Buddhism identifies tanha, craving, as the root of suffering, and the primary force that binds us to the illusion of a separate self. According to this view, the self is not a fixed entity but a process of grasping, a constant reaching toward something believed to complete us. Remove the grasping, and the sense of I begins to fade. Mystics across cultures echo this insight. Desire is the hook that keeps the ego tethered to its own story. And yet, desire is a master of disguise. It doesn't just manifest as longing for material things or external goals. It can wear subtler masks. The desire to be understood, to be right, to be enlightened, even to stop desiring. Each of these creates a new identity to inhabit. I am a seeker. I am a rebel. I am a thinker. In this way, desire keeps the self alive even as we attempt to transcend it. This doesn't mean desire is inherently bad. It's a natural part of being human. It drives creativity, fosters connection, fuels exploration. The problem arises when we mistake its movements for our essence. When we believe, I am what I want, we become trapped in an endless chase, always seeking the next thing to define us. The self becomes a reflection of its cravings, constantly expanding, contracting, reinventing itself, yet never at peace. The illusion begins to weaken when we observe desire without immediately acting on it. When a craving arises, and we don't identify with it, when we see it as simply another phenomenon appearing in awareness, its power over us diminishes. In that gap, something remarkable becomes clear. Desire comes and goes, but awareness remains. The I built around wanting fades, and what's left is not a hungry self, but a vast stillness that needs nothing to complete it. In the end, desire is both the spark and the shadow of the self. It builds the narrative of who we are, and binds us to the idea that we must become something more. But when we stop clinging to desire, not by suppressing it, but by seeing it clearly, we discover that we were never lacking to begin with. The self was never the one who desired. Desire was the one that created the self, and when it loosens its grip, the illusion begins to crumble. There's a voice inside your head, a constant familiar companion that comments on everything you do. It narrates your day, argues with itself, replays past conversations, imagines future ones, praises, criticizes, plans, doubts, and judges. It feels intimate, inseparable, and deeply personal. And because it speaks in the first person, because it says I, you assume it's you. But the shocking truth is that this voice isn't yours. It never was. The internal monologue is one of the most convincing illusions of self, because it seems to originate from within. It speaks your language, uses your memories, and references your life. But if you slow down and watch it carefully, you'll notice something strange. The voice speaks on its own. You don't choose the words it says. You don't plan its sentences. Often you don't even agree with it. It just appears, spontaneous, automatic, uninvited, and yet you take responsibility for every syllable. Think about the last time an intrusive thought popped into your mind. Perhaps it was an image you didn't want to see, a memory you'd rather forget, or a judgment you didn't consciously make. Where did it come from? You didn't summon it. It arose without your involvement, and yet, moments later, the mind claimed it. Why did I think that? What's wrong with me? The illusion of ownership is so strong that we blame ourselves for thoughts we didn't author. Psychologists have long studied this phenomenon. Thoughts are generated by complex, largely unconscious processes, associations, memories, sensory input, emotional states that operate beneath awareness. They surface like bubbles rising from deep water, often surprising even us. But because the voice uses the word I, we assume there must be a thinker behind the thinking. That assumption is the foundation of the self. But consider this: if you were truly the author of your thoughts, you would have complete control over them. You could stop them at will. You could silence the inner critic, erase painful memories, or generate insights on demand. But you can't. No matter how much willpower you exert, the voice keeps speaking. Sometimes it whispers gently, other times it shouts over everything else, and often, it says things you wish it wouldn't. This is proof that it's not you. It's just mental activity happening to you, not by you. The content of that voice reveals another clue. Much of what it says isn't original. It's an echo, a collage of other people's words, cultural conditioning, childhood lessons, media messages, and inherited beliefs. The tone of your self-criticism might mirror a parent's voice. Your ambitions might repeat societal expectations. Your fears might reflect collective narratives you never consciously accepted. In this way, the internal monologue is less an expression of individuality and more a chorus of influences. It's a patchwork of the past masquerading as me. Even language itself shapes this illusion. Because thought usually takes the form of inner speech, it feels like communication, as though one part of you is talking to another. But this is a trick of language. Just as the word sunrise makes it seem like the sun rises, when, in fact, the earth is rotating, the phrase "I think" makes it seem like there's a thinker behind the thought, but in reality, there is only thinking happening spontaneously in awareness. Some traditions have explored this truth for centuries. In meditation, practitioners are taught to observe thoughts without identifying with them. At first, this is difficult. The voice is so loud and constant that it feels impossible to separate from it. But over time, a subtle shift occurs. You begin to notice the space between thoughts. You see them arise and pass like clouds drifting through the sky. And in that noticing, you realize something profound. If you can observe the voice, then you are not the voice. This realization can be unsettling. If the voice isn't you, then who are you? But it's also deeply liberating. Most of our suffering comes from believing the voice's stories about who we are, what we deserve, what the future holds. We treat its opinions as facts, its fears as truth, its judgments as reality. But once you see the voice for what it is, conditioned, automatic, impersonal, its power begins to fade. It still speaks, but you no longer obey every word. It still comments, but you no longer believe everything it says. The voice will never disappear, nor should it. Thought is a useful tool. It helps us plan, imagine, solve, and create. The problem arises when we mistake the tool for the wielder. When we identify with the voice, we live as its prisoner. When we see it as just another phenomenon arising in awareness, we become its witness, and the witness is free. The voice in your head is not a self. It's a story, a soundtrack, a background noise. It's the weather, not the sky. And when you stop clinging to it, when you stop believing that its words are your words, something vast and silent emerges beneath it. Pure awareness, still and unshaken, untouched by the endless chatter, that is closer to what you are than any sentence the mind will ever speak. From the moment you are born, you are surrounded by invisible teachers, not just your parents and caregivers, but your language, your culture, your traditions, your stories, your history, your technology. These forces shape the way you see the world, long before you know you're being shaped. They teach you how to think, what to value, what to fear, and who to become. And by the time you're old enough to question them, their lessons have already become part of you. In truth, much of who you believe yourself to be is not you at all. It's society, programmed into human form. Consider how early this programming begins. Before you can speak, you're absorbing patterns. The emotional tone of the voices around you, the rhythms of conversation, the reactions to your cries and laughter. These patterns lay the foundation for how you will understand communication, attachment, trust, and safety. You are not choosing any of this. You are being conditioned by it. The world is writing its code into you. Language is perhaps the most powerful program of all. It doesn't just allow you to describe reality. It defines the boundaries of what you can perceive and express. Words carve the world into categories: good and bad, beautiful and ugly, us and them. They shape your thoughts before you even realize you're thinking. And with those categories come implicit values. A culture that prizes independence teaches you to glorify individuality. One that prizes harmony teaches you to value conformity. Both are arbitrary, but once internalized, they feel like your beliefs. Even your sense of morality, what you believe is right or wrong, is largely a social inheritance. If you'd been born in another century or on another continent, your moral compass might point in a completely different direction. Practices you now consider normal might have seemed abhorrent, and actions you consider unacceptable might have been virtues. Yet we rarely question these inherited frameworks. Instead, we internalize them so deeply that we mistake them for universal truths and for parts of ourselves. Society doesn't just shape what we believe, it scripts how we behave. From early childhood, we are rewarded for compliance and punished for deviation. We are taught to seek approval, to follow rules, to measure ourselves by external standards. Education systems reward certain types of intelligence while ignoring others. Media glorifies particular lifestyles and bodies. Social norms tell us how to dress, how to speak, how to love, how to succeed. Over time, these patterns become so ingrained that we stop seeing them as external pressures and start calling them choices. Even our ambitions are often programmed. Think about the goals you pursue: career, wealth, status, relationships. How many of them arose spontaneously from within you? And how many were inherited expectations? We tell ourselves we want certain things, but that wanting is often planted, repeated so often by parents, teachers, advertisements and peers that it feels like our own. And once desire takes hold, the self organizes itself around it. I want this, therefore I am this kind of person. But the source of that wanting was never truly ours. Social identity, the labels we wear, is perhaps the clearest example. Nationality, religion, gender, profession, political affiliation. Each of these is a construct created by society and absorbed by the individual. They give us belonging, but they also give us boundaries. They tell us who we are, but they also tell us who we are not. And once we accept these labels, we defend them fiercely, as if they were intrinsic to our being. We fight wars over them. We break relationships over them. But they are not who we are. They are ideas that society implanted into the story of me. The influence of society is so pervasive that even rebellion is often programmed. When people reject mainstream values, they usually adopt alternative ones, and those alternatives are themselves shaped by cultural forces. We move from one identity to another, from one belief system to its opposite, never noticing that both were provided by the same external source. The illusion of autonomy persists because we choose among options, but the menu of options was written long before we arrived. This realization can be unsettling. It suggests that much of what we think of as me is not self-authored. It's borrowed, absorbed, imprinted. But far from being disempowering, this awareness is profoundly liberating. When you see how thoroughly society has programmed you, you gain the freedom to question that programming. You begin to ask, do I truly believe this? Or was I taught to? Do I really want this? Or was I told I should? Who would I be if none of these influences defined me? The deeper you explore these questions, the more layers of conditioning you peel away, and the closer you come to something that is not shaped by the world. Beneath the layers of cultural scripting lies pure awareness, a field of consciousness untouched by language, labels, or norms. It is not bound by nationality or ideology. It is not male or female, not liberal or conservative, not insider or outsider. It simply is. And that, not the programmed personality you've mistaken for yourself, is your true nature. Society writes the code, but you are not the code. You are the awareness that can read it, question it, and even choose to delete it. And once you see that clearly, the power of those invisible teachers begins to fade. The puppet strings of conditioning loosen, and the self, once a product of programming, starts to dissolve into something vaster, freer, and infinitely more real. Every society is a stage, and from the moment we arrive on it, we are handed scripts. You are a daughter. You are a son. You are a student, a citizen, a believer, a worker. These roles help the play run smoothly. They give structure, order, and predictability to human interaction. But over time, we forget they are roles. We mistake the costume for the person wearing it. And when that happens, the authentic core of our being becomes buried under layers of performance. The first roles we adopt are given to us, not chosen. They are defined by family expectations, cultural traditions, and social norms. A child learns quickly what behaviors are rewarded and which are punished. They internalize what it means to be good, polite, strong, or smart. They learn how to behave in front of parents, teachers, and peers. And with each adjustment, they step further into character. Not because they are being dishonest, but because being accepted often depends on playing the part. As we grow, the number of roles multiplies. In one day, you might be a colleague, a friend, a partner, a sibling, a mentor, and a customer, switching personas seamlessly as situations demand. Each comes with its own expectations, how to speak, how to dress, how to act, even how to feel. This adaptability is often praised as social intelligence, but it also highlights a deeper truth. There is no single stable you behind these performances. There is only a fluid consciousness shifting to meet each context. The problem arises when roles cease to be tools and become identities. What begins as something you do becomes something you are. A job title turns into self-worth. A relationship status becomes the core of identity. Social labels, mother, manager, leader, outcast, stop being descriptions and start being prisons. And because society reinforces them, with rewards for conformity and penalties for deviation, most people spend their lives trapped in roles they never consciously chose. This role-based living often leads to a profound disconnection from authenticity. How many times have you acted a certain way, not because it felt true, but because it was expected? How many beliefs do you hold simply because they align with your role? A teacher must be authoritative. A leader must be confident. A parent must be selfless. These are narratives, not necessities, and yet we cling to them because stepping outside the role feels like stepping outside ourselves. Roles also create conflict. Because they are often rigid, they clash when life demands flexibility. The role of successful professional might compete with present parent. The role of devout believer might collide with independent thinker. When this happens, people often experience deep anxiety, not because they are failing, but because their true self has been reduced to incompatible scripts. Philosophers and psychologists have long observed this phenomenon. Carl Jung warned of persona inflation, the danger of identifying so completely with a social role that we lose contact with the deeper layers of the psyche. The existentialists argued that most people live in bad faith, conforming to external expectations instead of choosing authentically. Even ancient wisdom traditions taught the same lesson. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna reminds Arjuna that his duty is not to cling to identity, but to act without attachment to the role itself. One of the most powerful indicators that roles are illusions is how easily they change. A person who identifies deeply as a leader can become a follower overnight in a different environment. A rebel might transform into a traditionalist under new circumstances. The roles shift, but the awareness that plays them remains the same. This suggests that roles are like clothes worn for a time, then discarded, while the wearer is something else entirely. Even rebellion against roles is often just another role. Many who reject conventional paths end up defining themselves by that rejection. I am the outsider. I am the free spirit. I am the one who refuses labels. But this too is a label, another mask, another costume. It still relies on contrast with the roles it opposes. The ego is clever like that. If it cannot define itself by fitting in, it will define itself by standing out. Either way, it remains trapped in definition. The first step to seeing through this illusion is to recognize that roles are performances, not identities. They are useful tools for navigating the social world, nothing more. When you stop confusing them with your essence, they lose their power to define you. You can step into a role fully when needed, and step out of it without losing yourself. You can play the part without believing you are the part. What lies beyond the roles is something deeper, a silent presence that doesn't depend on labels, expectations, or scripts. It doesn't need to be good, or successful, or important. It doesn't even need to be someone, it simply is. And the moment you glimpse it, even briefly, the grip of every identity loosens. You were never the roles you played. You were never the names, titles, or personas. Those were masks borrowed for a time, necessary perhaps, but never truly yours. Beneath them all is the same timeless awareness that has watched each character rise and fall. That is the real you. If you is even the right word for something so vast and free. If there's one illusion more persuasive than all the rest, it's the illusion of continuity, the deeply held belief that you are the same person you were yesterday, last year, or 20 years ago. It feels obvious. You have the same name, many of the same memories, and perhaps some of the same habits and preferences. You tell a story about your life, as if there's a single thread weaving through it all. But this sense of an unbroken self is not proof of its existence. It's a cognitive illusion, a narrative convenience the mind constructs to make sense of change. The truth is that nothing about you remains constant. Your body is not the same. Its cells are replaced. Its chemistry shifts. Its shape and abilities evolve. Your mind is not the same. Its memories fade. Its beliefs transform. Its desires morph with time. Even your personality, which you may think of as stable, changes subtly and sometimes dramatically over the course of a lifetime. And yet, despite this constant flux, you still wake up each morning convinced that you are the same I who went to sleep the night before. Why? Because the mind stitches together the fragments and calls the patchwork whole. Memory plays a central role in this trick. It acts like a thread sewing together otherwise disconnected moments of experience. You remember being a child, a teenager, an adult, and those memories form the illusion of a continuous you traveling through time. But memory is notoriously unreliable. It's not a recording of the past but a reconstruction, edited, interpreted, and often distorted to fit your current sense of identity, and yet, you rarely question its authority. The story it tells feels seamless, even though it's full of gaps and fabrications. This illusion of continuity extends beyond memory. It's also a product of attention. At any given moment, your mind filters out an overwhelming amount of sensory input, selecting only what's necessary to maintain a coherent sense of reality. If it didn't, every second would feel fragmented and chaotic. The same is true for the self. The mind edits out discontinuities. The moments when your behavior contradicts your values, when your identity shifts with context, when your preferences flip without explanation, and weaves them into a consistent narrative. The inconsistencies don't disappear, they're simply explained away, reinterpreted, or forgotten. Psychologists call this phenomenon narrative identity. It's the story you tell yourself about who you are, a story that selectively highlights certain events, minimizes others, and imposes cause and effect relationships where none exist. This story is deeply compelling because it offers meaning and coherence. It reassures you that there's a you steering the ship, but the story isn't reality, it's a map drawn after the journey has already happened. Consider how drastically your self has changed over the years. The child who once believed in monsters is gone. The teenager obsessed with fitting in is gone. The person who once loved someone deeply and now barely remembers their face is gone. And yet, you call all these versions me. In truth, they are no more connected than the stages of a flame. Each moment a new configuration of fuel, heat, and air, each moment burning itself into existence and disappearing into the next. This illusion of continuity is so deeply woven into consciousness that even dramatic changes fail to shake it. People who undergo profound transformations after trauma, spiritual awakening, or radical lifestyle shifts still call themselves by the same name. They know they're not the same person, yet the label I persists. The mind clings to continuity, not because it's true, but because the alternative, that you are being recreated every moment, feels too destabilizing. Neuroscience reinforces this perspective. The brain is not a static machine but a constantly rewiring network. Neural connections form, dissolve, and reform based on experience. Even your sense of self, associated with activity in the default mode network, is dynamic, fluctuating from moment to moment. There is no single neural seat of identity, no permanent self lodged somewhere in the folds of the cortex. There is only continuous change, interpreted as sameness. But why does the illusion persist so stubbornly? Because continuity provides comfort. It makes life feel predictable and gives meaning to suffering. It allows you to plan for the future, learn from the past, and take responsibility for your actions. Without it, the very idea of morality, accountability, and purpose would seem to crumble. Yet, this comfort comes at a cost. It hides the deeper truth that the self is not a stable entity, but a constantly shifting process. When you begin to see through the illusion, life takes on a different texture. Instead of clinging to the idea of who you are, you begin to witness the unfolding of what you're becoming, moment by moment, breath by breath. The self stops being a noun and becomes a verb. There is no I who changes. There is only changing. There is no I who grows. There is only growing. And with that shift, the weight of identity begins to lift. This realization is not nihilistic. It's liberating. It means you are not bound by the past or limited by your story. You are not trapped in an unchanging self. You are a process, dynamic, evolving, endlessly new. And once you stop insisting on continuity, you discover a deeper kind of stability, the stability of awareness itself, which remains constant, even as every experience within it changes. Continuity is a clever trick, a magic show the mind performs to keep the illusion of I alive. But when the curtain is pulled back, what remains is far more extraordinary, a universe in motion, endlessly reinventing itself, with no permanent self at the center, only the miracle of change itself. Every person carries a biography in their head, a detailed, deeply personal account of who they are, where they've been, and how they became the way they are today. This internal story is woven from thousands of moments, stitched together by memory into a coherent narrative. It feels solid, trustworthy, and deeply yours. But here's the unsettling truth. Memory is not a faithful historian. It is a storyteller, an editor, and often a liar, and the you it has written into existence may be more fiction than fact. We tend to think of memory as a reliable recording device, a mental archive we can consult to recall the past. But cognitive science tells a very different story. Memory is reconstructive, not reproductive. Every time you remember something, your brain doesn't play back a recording. It recreates the experience from scattered fragments of stored information, like a puzzle assembled anew each time. In that process of reconstruction, details shift, emotions intensify or fade, and meanings change. Over time, the memory drifts further from what actually happened. This is not a flaw. It's how the human mind is designed. Memory is meant less to preserve the past accurately, and more to make sense of the present. It constantly edits itself to align with your current beliefs, values, and self-image. If you now see yourself as resilient, you might unconsciously exaggerate the difficulties you overcame. If you view yourself as kind, you might downplay moments of cruelty. If you believe you were wronged, you might remember events in a way that supports that narrative. The past is continuously rewritten to serve the story of the present. Psychologists call this memory bias, and it's everywhere. The peak-end rule, for instance, shows how people remember experiences not by their overall reality, but by their most intense moment and their ending. Source misattribution shows how easily we confuse imagined events with real ones. False memory studies demonstrate how simply suggesting an event can implant it in someone's mind, as if it truly occurred. In one famous experiment, participants were led to believe they had been lost in a shopping mall as children, a completely fabricated event. Many later remembered it vividly, complete with sensory details. Their memory wasn't lying maliciously, it was filling in gaps with plausible fiction. And yet, we build our sense of self on this shifting foundation. We say, I am who I am because of what I've been through, as if those experiences were fixed points in time, but the version of those events you remember is not the same one that happened. It has been colored, stretched, cropped, and repainted to fit your evolving identity. The biography you carry in your head is not history, it's mythology. This rewriting doesn't stop at personal memory. It extends to collective memory too. Families, communities, and nations reshape their histories to support current narratives. Stories of triumph are exaggerated, stories of shame are minimized, and inconvenient truths are erased. We do the same thing internally. We are not just unreliable narrators. We are active propagandists, constantly curating the story of me. It's worth asking, if memory is so malleable, why do we trust it so deeply? The answer is that the illusion of continuity depends on it. Without memory, the self falls apart. If you woke up tomorrow with no recollection of who you were, your identity, your preferences, beliefs, ambitions, would lose their grounding. You might still have a personality, but it would feel disconnected from the person you believe yourself to be. The past, however inaccurate, provides the scaffolding on which the illusion of a stable self is built. But this dependence creates a paradox. The more we cling to memory to define ourselves, the more we are defined by something that isn't real, and the more we question memory's reliability, the more fragile the self becomes. What does it mean to say, I am shaped by my past, if the past is a story that changes every time we tell it? Yet, there's freedom in this realization. If memory is not a fixed archive but a fluid narrative, then the self it constructs is not fixed either. You are not bound by the events you remember, nor by the meanings you've assigned to them. They can be reinterpreted, reframed, even released. And once you see memory as a creative force rather than a historical record, you begin to understand that identity itself is a kind of art project, continuously updated, endlessly rewritten. This doesn't mean that the past is meaningless, or that memory is useless. It means we must treat memory with humility. It's a guide, not a gospel. It points toward truths, but it is not the truth itself. And perhaps most importantly, it is not you. You are not the collection of stories memory tells. You are the awareness in which those stories arise, the silent witness watching the biography unfold, even as its details shift with each retelling. The you think you remember may never have existed in the way you imagine. And if that's true, then the self that depends on that story, the self that clings to its past as proof of its existence, is just as fictional. What remains beyond that fiction is something memory can't touch: the present moment, and the awareness that has been here through every version of the story. We like to think that we have beliefs, that they are tools we use to navigate the world, conclusions we arrive at after careful thought. But the truth is far stranger. Beliefs don't just shape how you see the world, they shape who you are. They sculpt your identity, filter your reality, and silently write the story of you. In many ways, you don't hold beliefs. Beliefs hold you. From the very beginning, belief operates beneath the surface of awareness. As children, we inherit countless assumptions from our families and cultures before we have the capacity to question them. We learn what is right and wrong, what is possible and impossible, what is true and false. These early beliefs become the invisible scaffolding on which all later understanding is built, and once they're in place, we rarely stop to ask whether they're accurate. We simply build our lives around them. Beliefs act as cognitive filters. They decide which information gets through and which gets ignored. When you believe something, your mind selectively pays attention to evidence that supports it and dismisses evidence that contradicts it. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, and it affects everything from politics to personal identity. If you believe you're unlucky, you'll notice every small misfortune and overlook every success. If you believe you're unworthy, you'll interpret compliments as pity and criticism as confirmation. Over time, these filtered experiences become proof, not just of the belief but of the self that belief creates. This is how beliefs shape identity. They don't just reflect who you are, they define the parameters of who you can be. Someone who believes they are capable, takes risks, explores possibilities, and grows. Someone who believes they are incapable, avoids challenges, stays small, and confirms their own limitations. The belief doesn't merely predict behavior, it produces it. And once behavior aligns with belief, the belief feels even more true, reinforcing the cycle. This cycle extends beyond the personal. Collective beliefs about gender, race, success, morality, shape entire cultures, in turn shape the people who live within them. A society that believes wealth equals worth produces individuals obsessed with status. A society that believes obedience equals virtue produces citizens who fear questioning authority. These beliefs don't live out there in books or laws, they live in here, woven into the self-concept of everyone they touch. What's most remarkable is how malleable these belief-based identities are. When beliefs shift, identity often shifts with them. Consider someone who once believed they were fundamentally sinful, and later comes to see themselves as inherently worthy, or someone who once believed the world was hostile, and later sees it as full of opportunity. These transformations are often described as finding oneself, but in reality, they're evidence that the self was never fixed. It was simply a byproduct of whatever beliefs were in place at the time. Even deeply held convictions are not as stable as we imagine. Research shows that many of our strongest beliefs are adopted, not through rational deliberation, but through social influence, emotional resonance, and repetition. We believe things because people we trust believe them, because they make us feel safe, or simply because we've heard them often enough. And once a belief takes root, it can persist long after the evidence that supported it has vanished. This is why people can continue believing falsehoods, even when presented with overwhelming proof to the contrary. The belief is not in the intellect, it's in the identity. This is why challenging a belief often feels like a personal attack. When someone questions your worldview, it doesn't just feel like they're disagreeing with an idea, it feels like they're threatening you. The ego clings to beliefs because they provide structure and stability. Without them, the self feels groundless, undefined, and vulnerable. And yet that vulnerability is the gateway to freedom. When you begin to question your beliefs, to hold them up to the light and ask, is this true? Is this mine? The scaffolding of the self begins to loosen. You start to see how much of what you know is inherited, unexamined, or outdated. You begin to notice how many of your limitations are self-imposed, not because they're real, but because you believed they were. And with every belief that falls away, a little more of the illusion dissolves. This doesn't mean abandoning all belief. Beliefs are necessary for functioning in the world. They give us meaning, guide our actions, and connect us with others. But it does mean holding them lightly, recognizing them as lenses rather than truths, tools rather than identities. When a belief stops serving you, you can let it go. When evidence contradicts it, you can update it. And when a belief tries to define who you are, you can remember that you are not the belief, you are the awareness in which belief arises and fades. In the end, beliefs are not cages, unless you mistake them for walls. They are stories, useful, powerful, but never absolute. And once you understand that the believer is shaped by the belief, you begin to glimpse something deeper, a self that exists before any story is told. That silent awareness has no doctrine, no ideology, no label, it simply is, vast, fluid, and free. There's a peculiar feature of consciousness that most people never question: the ability to observe itself. You think a thought, and then you notice yourself thinking it. You feel an emotion, and then you comment on feeling it. You act, and then you reflect on your action. It's as though there's a you doing something, and another you standing off to the side, watching it happen. This recursive awareness seems to prove that there must be a real, stable self somewhere behind the curtain. After all, who else could be doing the observing? But if you follow this logic closely, it leads you to a paradox that unravels the illusion entirely. The mind's capacity to split itself into actor and observer is one of its most convincing tricks. The observing self, often called the witness, feels more fundamental than thoughts, feelings, or actions because it seems to exist behind them. It appears unchanged as experiences come and go, and so we assume it must be the real me. But this assumption contains a hidden flaw. The observer is itself observable. Try a simple exercise. Notice the part of you that's reading this sentence. Can you feel that subtle sense of I sitting behind your eyes, listening, watching, taking it all in? Now, notice that you are aware of that awareness. In other words, the observer itself becomes the object of observation. And if the observer can be observed, then it cannot be the final fundamental self, because there's still something beyond it that's doing the observing. This leads to an infinite regress. If the self is the one who observes, and that self can also be observed, then there must be another self behind that, and another behind that, stretching endlessly into the distance. This infinite chain reveals a profound truth. The observer is not an entity at all. It's a process, a function of consciousness, not a fixed identity. And because it's a process, it has no true owner. Neuroscience supports this insight. What we call meta-awareness, the ability to be aware of our own awareness, arises from distributed neural networks, not a single self-center. It's the result of multiple layers of perception, interacting with each other. This recursive loop gives rise to the illusion of a watcher, but no watcher is ever found. The brain observes its own activity, labels it as me, and then observes that label, repeating the cycle indefinitely. This recursive structure also explains why the sense of self feels both so real and so elusive. It's real because the act of self-observation is happening. The experience is undeniable, but it's elusive because there's no final subject to pin down. Every time you try to locate the one who's watching, you find only another layer of experience being watched. The closer you look, the more the self dissolves into a hall of mirrors, each reflection pointing to another, none of them the original. Spiritual traditions have used this insight for centuries as a tool for awakening. Advaita Vedanta teaches the practice of neti, not this, not that, encouraging seekers to reject every layer of identity they can observe as not me. Thoughts, not me. Emotions, not me. The body, not me. Even the witness, not me. Eventually what's left is not an observer but pure awareness, ungraspable, unlocatable, without qualities. Buddhism makes a similar point with the concept of anatta, no self. There is observation, but no observer, experience but no experiencer. The psychological implications are equally profound. Much of our suffering arises from the belief that there's a central I who is responsible for everything that happens, the one who fails, regrets, worries, and judges. But if that I is just another layer of observation, then the weight of its burdens begins to dissolve. There is no permanent entity that needs defending, no fixed core that needs protecting. There is only awareness, fluid, spacious, free. Even morality and growth take on a new dimension when this is understood. If there is no singular self watching and judging, then self-improvement stops being about fixing a broken person and becomes about refining patterns of awareness. Instead of I must become better, the process becomes awareness is learning. This shift removes shame and resistance, replacing them with curiosity and compassion. And yet, even knowing this, the illusion persists. The self that watches itself is a deeply ingrained habit of the mind, a survival mechanism that allows us to plan, reflect, and navigate the world. It's not inherently bad, it's just not ultimately real. The problem arises when we mistake the functionality of self-observation for evidence of a permanent self. The next time you catch yourself observing your own thoughts, judging them, narrating them, analyzing them, pause and look a little deeper. Who is watching, and who is watching the watcher? Follow the chain far enough, and you'll find there's nothing solid at the end of it, just awareness aware of itself, with no center, no owner, no boundary. The self that watches itself is not a hidden soul peering out from behind the eyes. It's a mirage born of consciousness, looping back on itself. And like all mirages, it loses its power when you stop chasing it. What remains is not a watcher or a watched, but the vast centerless field in which both appear, a boundless awareness that doesn't belong to anyone, because it is everyone and everything. One of the most persistent illusions the self depends on is the belief in separation. The idea that there is a me in here and a world out there, that there's a clear boundary between subject and object, self and other, observer and observed. It's such a deeply ingrained assumption that questioning it feels absurd. Of course you are separate from the tree outside, the chair beneath you, the people passing by, And yet, when we examine this belief with care, through science, philosophy, or direct experience, it collapses entirely. The self is not a sealed-off entity wandering through a foreign universe. It is a dynamic expression of that universe itself. Nothing in truth is separate from anything else. The illusion of separation starts with the body. Because we have a skin, we assume it marks a clear border between me and not me. But that border is porous and arbitrary. The air you inhale becomes part of your blood. The food you eat becomes your flesh. The microbes living inside you outnumber your own cells and are essential to your survival. Every second, particles from the environment pass through you, and particles of you return to the environment. The boundary is more like a shimmering mirage, constantly shifting, never fixed. Zoom in further, and the illusion breaks down even more. Physics tells us that at the most fundamental level, everything is made of the same stuff. Energy vibrating in different patterns, matter exchanging particles with the environment in a continuous flow. The atoms that compose your body were forged in the hearts of ancient stars. The calcium in your bones was once part of a mountain. The oxygen in your blood was once part of a tree. The universe doesn't create you within it. It expresses itself as you. Even consciousness, the inner realm where the self seems most distinct, is deeply interconnected. Your thoughts, feelings, and perceptions don't arise in isolation. They're shaped by language, culture, relationships, and history. The words you use to think were created by countless generations before you. The values you hold were shaped by collective experience. The very sense of I emerges from a shared human framework that no individual invented. You are not a solitary thinker inside a private mind. You are the echo of countless others thinking through you. This interconnectedness is not just theoretical, it's experiential. Try watching your next breath closely. Where does you end and the world begin in that exchange? The air moves in and out, life sustains itself, but there is no clear line dividing giver and receiver. Or listen to a piece of music, and notice how your emotions respond. The sound waves come from outside, but the feelings they create arise inside. Are they yours or the music's? Or sit quietly and observe your thoughts. Where do they come from? They appear spontaneously, shaped by external influences and internal conditions, inseparable from the web of causes that birthed them. The self's belief in separation is reinforced by language. We use words like I, you, it, and they to carve the seamless fabric of reality into discrete pieces. This is useful for communication, but profoundly misleading. Nature doesn't recognize these boundaries. A river isn't separate from the rain that feeds it, or the ocean it flows into. A forest isn't separate from the soil, the sun, or the countless organisms within it. Likewise, you aren't separate from your environment. You are the environment, momentarily taking the shape of a human being. Ancient wisdom traditions have been saying this for centuries. In Advaita Vedanta, the ultimate truth is non-duality. There is no two, no subject and object, only one reality appearing as many. Buddhism teaches the concept of pratyasamutpada, dependent origination, which states that nothing exists independently. Everything arises through a network of conditions. Even modern ecology and systems theory echo the same insight. Every part of a system is defined by its relationships with everything else. Nothing stands alone. The psychological consequences of this illusion are profound. Believing ourselves to be separate breeds fear, loneliness, and greed. We see the world as something to conquer, other people as competitors or threats, nature as a resource to exploit. We build walls, physical, emotional, ideological, to protect our fragile identities. But these defenses only deepen the illusion, and with it, our suffering. When the illusion of separation begins to dissolve, something remarkable happens. Compassion arises naturally, not as a moral duty, but as a direct recognition of shared being. Harming another becomes unthinkable, because there is no other to harm. Taking care of the earth becomes an act of self-preservation, because there is no self apart from the earth. Even death loses some of its sting, because you realize that what you are, the processes, the matter, the awareness, was never separate to begin with, and therefore never truly ends. You are not an isolated drop in an indifferent ocean. You are the ocean taking the temporary shape of a drop. The wind does not blow on you. It blows through you. The world does not happen to you. It happens as you. And once you see this clearly, the idea of a separate self begins to look absurd, like a wave insisting it's independent from the sea. The illusion of separation is the final fortress of the ego, the last defense it builds against the truth of its own non-existence. But once that fortress crumbles, a deeper reality emerges, one of profound connection, boundless belonging, and radical unity. In that reality, there is no me and you, no inside and outside, no observer and observed. There is only life, endlessly expressing itself, one seamless whole, and you are it. If the illusion of self is a fortress, then ego is its last and most stubborn wall, the final defense against the realization that there was never a you to defend in the first place. Strip away the stories, roles, desires, memories, and beliefs, and the ego still whispers, I am here, I matter, I am separate. Even when every logical argument collapses, even when direct experience points to emptiness, ego clings to existence like a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood, and in many ways this desperate resistance is its most convincing illusion of all. To understand the ego's final defense, you first have to see what the ego truly is. It's not a villain or a parasite. It's a strategy, a pattern of psychological activity designed to protect the organism. The ego's purpose is survival, not just of the body, but of the story you tell about that body. It creates a narrative of me, because a cohesive self is easier to defend than a collection of shifting experiences. And as long as that story remains intact, the ego can justify its existence. The ego defends itself in countless ways, but perhaps its most powerful tactic is attachment. It ties itself to ideas, possessions, achievements, and relationships, convincing you that without them, you would cease to exist. I am my job. I am my reputation. I am my success. When these things are threatened, the ego panics, because their destruction feels like annihilation. Yet none of them are truly you. They're temporary forms that life takes on its way through time. Another strategy is resistance. The ego thrives on control, on believing it can shape reality to its preferences. When life doesn't go according to plan, when uncertainty creeps in, it fights back. It blames, denies, rationalizes, or distracts. Anything to avoid facing the truth that it is not in charge. This resistance isn't malicious. It's instinctual. A self that isn't in control risks being irrelevant, and irrelevance is the ego's deepest fear. Comparison is another subtle defense. Ego constantly measures itself against others, richer, smarter, prettier, stronger, to prove its worth. But comparison has no finish line. Even in victory, it's fragile, because someone better will always appear. And in defeat, it suffers, spiraling into envy or resentment. Yet, ego clings to comparison because without something to define itself against, it loses its sense of identity. Perhaps the most insidious defense is victimhood. When all else fails, when the illusion of superiority crumbles, when control slips away, ego turns to suffering as proof of existence. I am the one who was wronged. I am the one who hurts. Pain, too, becomes a kind of identity, a final foothold in the world. And because suffering feels deeply personal, it reinforces the belief that there must be a self experiencing it. Even spiritual practice is not immune to ego's tricks. The moment you begin to see through the illusion of self, ego often rebrands itself as the one who is awakening. It starts to measure spiritual progress, to compare insights, to seek recognition for its humility. It clings even more fiercely to existence, this time as a seeker or a realized being. In this way, the ego can even use the search for truth as a means to avoid it. Why does the ego fight so hard to survive? Because its existence depends on ignorance. The self is a story told by thought, a useful fiction that helps navigate the world. But if you stop believing the storyteller disappears. Ego senses this instinctively. It knows that true insight, the recognition that there is no permanent separate I, is the one thing it cannot survive. And so it distracts, resists, clings, compares, and suffers to keep you from looking too closely. But here's the paradox. The ego's defenses, however convincing, are built on nothing. They are strategies employed by a character who doesn't exist. When you see through them, not intellectually but directly, they lose their power. You can still have achievements without needing them to define you. You can still experience suffering without building an identity around it. You can still act in the world without clinging to the illusion of control. This doesn't mean destroying the ego. That's just another ego project. It means recognizing it for what it is, a set of protective mechanisms that arise and fall like everything else. When you stop identifying with them, they cease to be your defenses and become just movements of the mind, useful at times, irrelevant at others, but never fundamental to who you are. And when that recognition deepens, something remarkable happens. The ego's frantic grasping softens, the need to prove, defend, or justify evaporates. Life continues, decisions are made, relationships unfold, challenges arise, but they no longer revolve around a fragile center. They happen spontaneously, naturally, without the weight of me attached. The ego will still whisper from time to time. It will still try to resurrect itself in subtle ways, but its voice will sound hollow, a faint echo of a story you no longer believe. And in that silence, something far more profound emerges, not a self to defend, but the vastness that was always here, quietly watching the rise and fall of illusions. The final defense collapses not with a battle, but with a realization there was never anything to defend at all. If you peel away every layer of identity, the memories, the beliefs, the personality traits, the desires, the roles, you eventually reach a strange and unsettling point. There's nothing left. No solid me, hiding underneath the stories. No enduring essence waiting to be uncovered. Just an open, silent awareness, empty, boundless, without definition. And yet, this emptiness is not a void in the nihilistic sense. It is the very ground of existence, the field from which everything, including the illusion of self, arises. The tragedy, and the comedy, is that we spend our lives terrified of this emptiness while unknowingly living as it. The mind resists the idea of emptiness, because it equates it with annihilation. If there's no I, then who is reading these words? Who is loving, striving, dreaming? It feels impossible that the vibrant sense of being could come from nothing. But this resistance comes from a misunderstanding. Emptiness is not the absence of experience. It is the absence of a separate experiencer. It is not nothingness. It is the fertile space in which everything happens. Consider a wave in the ocean. It has a name, a shape, a direction. We can watch it rise, crest, and fall. But beneath its form, it is never anything but water. Water expressing itself as a wave. Likewise, the self is emptiness, expressing itself as a person. Your name, your personality, your life story, these are like the shape of the wave. But beneath them, you are the ocean itself. Formless, infinite, ungraspable. The name is just a label we attach to a temporary expression of something much vaster. The Buddhist concept of shunyata, or emptiness, points to this reality. It teaches that nothing has an independent, permanent essence. Not a tree, not a mountain, not a self. Everything exists only in relation to everything else, arising and dissolving through causes and conditions. This is not a philosophical abstraction. It's an observable fact. What you call you is a collection of processes, biological, psychological, social, in constant flux. Thoughts arise and vanish. Cells divide and die. Beliefs shift and dissolve. And yet, through all this change, we cling to the idea that there's a stable I at the center, that I is nothing more than emptiness wearing a name. Modern science points in the same direction. Neuroscientists searching for a self-center in the brain have found none. There's no single place where consciousness resides, no master control room pulling the strings. Instead, there's a dynamic network of processes that come together to create the illusion of a unified self. Remove those processes, and the illusion collapses, but awareness remains, just as the ocean remains when a wave subsides. Even language betrays the illusion. When you say I am sad, who exactly is sad? The emotion arises, lingers, and passes. But where is the I that owns it? When you say I remember, who is doing the remembering? The memory appears in consciousness, but does consciousness itself have a name? We label these phenomena with I, because the mind craves stability. It wants something to anchor the flux of experience, but the anchor is imaginary. It's a word wrapped around emptiness. This truth can feel frightening at first, because the ego interprets emptiness as a threat. It imagines a void, a loss of meaning, purpose, and identity. But when you look directly into this emptiness, you find not a vacuum but a vastness. It is not a cold absence but a luminous presence, the space in which every sensation, thought, and moment appears. It is the quiet awareness that has been here before you were born, and will remain long after every story about you dissolves. And in this realization lies a profound freedom. If the self is emptiness wearing a name, then nothing can truly harm it, because there is nothing to harm. Criticism cannot wound emptiness. Failure cannot diminish it. Death cannot end it. The dramas that consume the ego, success and failure, praise and blame, gain and loss, lose their grip when you see that the one they happen to was never anything more than a passing wave. This doesn't mean life becomes meaningless. In fact, the opposite happens. When you no longer cling to a fixed identity, you become free to participate fully in the play of existence. You can express yourself without being trapped by the expression. You can love without clinging, act without attachment, and live without fear. Like a wave dancing across the surface of the ocean. You are still you, but you know that you is just a costume emptiness wears for a little while. And when the wave falls back into the sea, when the body dies, the memories fade, the stories end, nothing is truly lost. The ocean remains. The emptiness remains. The awareness that has always been here continues, untouched and unchanged. The name dissolves, but what you truly are never does. The self was never a thing. It was never a solid object. It was never a permanent entity you could point to and say, "This is me." It was emptiness, infinite, formless, alive, pretending to be someone, just for a little while. And when that pretense ends, nothing dies, because nothing was ever born. Every night, without exception, the self disappears. It doesn't fade gradually or retreat to the background. It vanishes completely. In deep, dreamless sleep, there is no story, no memory, no identity. There is no name, no past, no future, no I. Hours pass, and yet, somehow, you return. You wake up, stretch, and say, "I slept so well, but who is that I, and where was it during the night?" If the self were a fixed, enduring entity, wouldn't it remain continuous, even as the body rests? Instead, it blinks out of existence and reappears, raising a profound question. If you disappear every night, then what, if anything, is truly real? The mystery of sleep offers one of the clearest clues that the self is not what it seems. In waking life, identity feels constant, an unbroken thread connecting your experiences. But every night, that thread snaps. During deep sleep, consciousness itself withdraws from thought, perception, and memory. There is no me worrying about the future, or replaying the past. There is no observer watching the darkness. Experience ceases, or at least the kind of experience we can describe or remember. And yet, when you wake, the illusion of continuity returns, as if nothing happened. This raises a troubling question. If the self can vanish so completely, was it ever real to begin with, or is it more like a temporary performance? A character that appears on the stage of consciousness only when the conditions are right. Sleep suggests the latter. The self is not a constant presence but a recurring event, like a flame that arises when fuel, oxygen, and heat meet. Remove any one of those conditions, and the flame, the I, is gone. What's more, the self doesn't return from sleep fully formed. It rebuilds itself, moment by moment. First, awareness flickers back on. Then orientation returns, a vague sense of time and place. Soon after, memory rushes in, stitching together a story. I am this person, in this body, living this life. Finally, the familiar voice of thought resumes its monologue. In the span of seconds, the illusion of me reassembles, as if it had never left. But the truth is that it did. Dreaming complicates the picture even further. In dreams, the self often survives, but in strange, mutable forms. You may act out roles, adopt identities, or even become multiple people at once. Your beliefs, personality, and sense of I can shift wildly. The dreaming mind reveals how malleable and unstable the self really is. If it were an enduring essence, it wouldn't be so easily transformed by the absence of waking consciousness. Even the simple act of waking up exposes the fragility of identity. Think of the disorientation you sometimes feel upon waking in an unfamiliar place, that brief moment before memory rushes in, when you don't know who you are or where you are. For that instant, the self doesn't exist, only awareness exists, pure, content-free, formless. The lie appears a heartbeat later, constructed from memory and context. This shows that the self is not the foundation of consciousness but an add-on, something layered atop awareness once the conditions allow. Philosophers have long wrestled with the implications of this daily disappearance. If I can cease to exist every night and reappear every morning, in what sense can it be said to exist at all? Is the self like a river, never the same twice, yet always called by the same name? Or is it more like a mirage, arising again and again in slightly different forms, convincing us of continuity where none exists? The Buddhist tradition points to the latter. It teaches that the self is a moment-to-moment fabrication, a process rather than a thing. Sleep is one of the clearest demonstrations of that process. Even neuroscience supports this view. During deep sleep, the brain networks responsible for self-referential thought, particularly the default mode network, go quiet. The narrative self, the sense of being an I, moving through time, disappears. What remains is basic physiological functioning, breath, heartbeat, cellular repair, all happening without a self to oversee them. In other words, the organism continues, but the story of you does not. So who wakes when you sleep? Not the self, at least, not in the way we imagine it. What wakes is awareness, the raw capacity for experience that is present before the mind assembles its narrative. The self arises within that awareness like a cloud forming in the sky, temporary, ever-changing, and ultimately insubstantial. This insight carries profound implications. It means the self is not essential to life. The heart beats, the body heals, the breath flows, the universe continues, all without you. And when you wake, the self is not recovered from some hidden vault. It is created anew. This challenges the deepest assumption we hold, that we are continuous beings. In reality, we are discontinuous, flickering into existence each morning, dissolving each night, always arising from the same mysterious source. And yet, this isn't a cause for despair. It's an invitation to see yourself differently, not as a solid object moving through time, but as a phenomenon appearing and disappearing in the infinite field of awareness. You are not the actor returning to the stage each day. You are the stage itself, timeless and unchanging, on which the actor briefly performs. Every night, the self dies. Every morning, it is born again. And if that's true, then perhaps it was never real in the way you thought it was. Perhaps you have always been nothing more than a beautiful illusion, a story the universe tells itself each time it opens its eyes. We are taught from the moment we can speak that we are the ones doing things. We take credit for our successes, feel guilt for our mistakes, and build our identities around the choices we believe we make. I decided, I created, I achieved. This sense of agency, the belief that we are the doers of our actions, is so deeply ingrained that questioning it feels like denying reality itself. And yet, if you look closely, the doer is just another illusion, one more character in the story the mind tells to keep the self alive. Start with something simple. Raise your hand. It feels as though you decided to do that, but did you really? Where did the impulse to raise your hand come from? Did you choose the thought, I will raise my hand, before it appeared? Did you design the electrical signals firing through your motor cortex? Did you consciously contract each muscle in the precise sequence required? Of course not. The action happened, but the story of I did this was added after the fact. Neuroscience has been exposing this illusion for decades. In Benjamin Libet's famous experiments, electrical activity in the brain associated with a decision was detected several hundred milliseconds before participants reported the conscious intention to act. Other studies have pushed this even further, predicting a person's choice several seconds before they're aware of making it. These findings suggest that decisions are initiated unconsciously, and that the conscious self arrives late to the scene, claiming credit for a process it did not start. This lag between cause and awareness reveals something profound. The doer is not the origin of action. It's a narrator, a storyteller, who arrives after the event and says, I did that, like a child running alongside a parade shouting, I'm leading. The self mistakes proximity for control, but the parade would march on with or without it. The illusion of the doer is reinforced by language. Every sentence we speak about action assumes an agent. We say, I wrote the book, not the book was written. I cooked dinner, not dinner came into being. This grammatical habit subtly shapes our perception of reality, tricking us into believing there must be a central self orchestrating every movement. But nature doesn't operate this way. Rivers flow without a river doing the flowing. Planets orbit without a planet deciding to move. Trees grow without a tree choosing to extend its branches. Action happens without an actor. If this sounds abstract, consider the countless actions that happen every moment without you. Your heart beats, your lungs draw air, your liver filters blood, all without conscious effort. Even most of your thoughts arise unbidden, surfacing in consciousness like bubbles in a boiling pot. If the self is not in charge of these fundamental processes, why assume it's in charge of anything else? The distinction between voluntary and involuntary actions is more a matter of perception than reality. The illusion of the doer persists because it serves a purpose. Believing we are the authors of our actions gives us a sense of control and responsibility. It motivates us to plan, to improve, to hold ourselves and others accountable. But usefulness is not the same as truth. The belief in a doer is a psychological tool, not an ontological fact. And like all tools, it can become a trap if mistaken for reality. Spiritual traditions have long pointed to this. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, "You are not the doer. Actions are performed by the qualities of nature." Buddhism teaches anatta, the doctrine of no self, which includes the insight that actions arise dependent on conditions, not from a central controller. Even mystics in the Christian and Sufi traditions speak of surrender, the recognition that life lives itself through us, and that we are not the source of its unfolding. This doesn't mean we become passive or stop acting. Actions still happen. Meals are cooked, books are written, hands are raised. The difference is that they happen without ownership. They arise from the complex interplay of biology, environment, memory, and circumstance, a vast web of causes stretching back through time. The self is not the author of these causes, it is one of their effects. Understanding this dissolves much of the unnecessary suffering we carry. Guilt, shame, pride, and blame all depend on the belief that I am the doer. But if actions are the inevitable result of countless conditions, most of which are beyond our control, then our role shifts from that of judge to that of witness. We still learn from our mistakes, but without the crushing weight of self-condemnation. We still celebrate achievements, but without the arrogance of ownership. We become participants in life, not its masters. And when the illusion of the doer dies, something extraordinary happens. Action becomes effortless. Decisions flow naturally, like water down a slope. Creativity blossoms without the anxiety of authorship. Even difficult choices lose their heaviness, because they are seen for what they are, the unfolding of conditions, not the burden of a solitary me. Life continues as it always has, but now it moves through you rather than being done by you. The death of the doer is not the end of action. It is the end of illusion. It is the recognition that you were never the puppet master pulling the strings. You were the strings themselves, dancing in harmony with everything else. And when you stop clinging to the idea of being in control, you discover a deeper peace, the peace of being a wave carried effortlessly by the tide of existence, rising and falling without effort, without will, without a doer at all. Imagine, for a moment, stripping everything away. Take away your name, remove your history, every story you've ever told yourself about where you came from and what you've done. Erase your personality traits, your habits, your likes and dislikes. Let go of your beliefs, your opinions, your relationships, your goals. Peel back every layer of identity until there is nothing left to call me. At first, this exercise feels terrifying. Without those layers, it seems as though you would vanish. And yet, if you do it honestly, even as a thought experiment, something remains, something silent, something vast, something real. This something isn't a person. It has no face, no age, no gender, no story. It cannot be described, because the moment you describe it, you've turned it back into an identity. It cannot be possessed because possession requires a possessor. It is not even yours. And yet, it is the most intimate thing about you. Closer than your heartbeat, more fundamental than your thoughts. It is the awareness that has been watching every moment of your life unfold, untouched by what happens within it. This awareness is not a new discovery. It's been here all along. It was present when you were a child, when your sense of self was still forming. It was present through every joy and heartbreak, every success and failure. It was present when you changed beliefs, when you changed jobs, when you changed relationships. It never aged, never broke, never disappeared. It is the still point in the center of the storm, the stage on which the drama of your life plays out. Everything else has changed, but awareness has remained exactly the same. The self you believe in is a collection of temporary phenomena, thoughts, feelings, memories, stories. But awareness is not temporary. It doesn't appear and disappear with circumstances. It doesn't depend on external validation or internal narrative. Even in deep sleep, when the sense of self vanishes entirely, awareness remains as potential, the space into which waking consciousness reappears. It's not what you are in the conventional sense, it's that you are. Philosophers and mystics have tried to point to this truth for centuries. In Advaita Vedanta, it's called the Atman, the unchanging witness behind all change. Buddhism calls it Buddha nature, the fundamental emptiness that allows everything to arise. Eckhart Tolle calls it presence. Ramana Maharshi called it the self, not the small egoic self, but the infinite awareness beyond identity. Different names, same reality, What remains when the illusion of you dissolves is not nothingness, it's everything. This realization changes everything about how we see life. When you believe you are the self, you live in constant fear of its fragility. You fear aging, because the self is tied to a youthful body. You fear failure, because the self is defined by achievement. You fear rejection, because the self depends on being seen and valued. You fear death, because you believe the self ends when the body ends. But when you recognize that awareness is what remains, those fears begin to fade. The body may change, the story may evolve, the personality may dissolve, but awareness is untouched. It doesn't come and go, it simply is. It's easy to misunderstand this realization as detachment, as if seeing yourself as awareness means withdrawing from life. But the opposite is true. When you no longer identify with the self, you're free to participate fully in the play of existence without clinging to it. You can love deeply without fearing loss, create boldly without fearing failure, speak honestly without fearing judgment. You become like an actor who knows they're on stage, free to throw themselves into the performance precisely because they know they are not the character. This shift also changes how we see others. If what remains in you is awareness, the same silent, formless presence that remains in everyone, then the boundaries between self and other start to dissolve. You stop seeing people as separate individuals defined by their identities, and start seeing them as expressions of the same underlying consciousness. Compassion ceases to be a moral obligation, and becomes a natural response to recognizing yourself in everything you encounter. The question then arises, if awareness is what remains without you, why does the illusion of you exist at all? The answer is simple and beautiful, because the universe wants to know itself. Awareness, infinite and formless, expresses itself through finite forms, so it can experience itself from countless perspectives. Your life, your story, your struggles, and joys. They're not mistakes, they're the way the universe tastes itself, sees itself, and learns about itself. The illusion of you is the universe's way of playing a game with itself, and waking up to this truth is part of the game too. When the you you've always believed in finally dissolves, when the doer dies, the thinker is seen through, the story is recognized as fiction. What remains is not a void but a fullness beyond measure. It's the awareness that was here before you were born, and will remain long after you're gone. It's not personal, yet it's more intimate than anything personal could ever be. It's not a thing, yet it's the source of all things. It's what's left when nothing is left, and it was never missing in the first place. So the final illusion isn't that the self is false, it's that anything was ever missing without it. What remains without you is not a lesser version of reality. It's reality itself, raw, immediate, unfiltered, and infinitely alive. And once you see that, the search for yourself ends, because you realize you were never lost. If everything you've believed about yourself is an illusion, if the thinker, the doer, the observer, even the I behind your thoughts is nothing more than a story, then what does it mean to awaken? What does it mean to truly wake up from the dream of self? It is not about gaining some new knowledge or attaining a mystical state. It is not about erasing your personality or transcending your humanity. Awakening is much simpler and far more radical than that. It is the moment you stop taking the illusion seriously. The dream of self has always been just that, a dream. Thoughts rise and fall, feelings surge and fade, identities form and dissolve. None of it is permanent. None of it is truly you. But for most of your life, you've believed the dream was real. You've clung to the stories your mind tells, defended the character it created, feared its death as if it were your own. Awakening is the recognition that the dream is happening, but that you are not bound by it. You are the awareness in which the dream appears, and once you see that, the dream loses its grip. This realization rarely arrives as a dramatic event. More often, it unfolds quietly, like dawn breaking over a dark landscape. One day, you catch yourself reacting to a thought, and realize the thought isn't yours. Another day, you notice a decision happening before you decide it. Eventually, the boundary between you and everything else begins to dissolve. Life stops feeling like something that happens to you, or something you do. It simply happens. And in that happening, the sense of a separate self starts to fade, like mist in morning sunlight. Awakening is not about annihilating the self. It's about seeing through it. The illusion may still appear, thoughts of I may still arise, the old narratives may still play out, but they no longer have the same power. They're seen for what they are, temporary appearances in the vast field of awareness. This is why many spiritual teachers describe awakening not as a transformation but as a shift in perspective. The world doesn't change. You don't change. But the way you relate to experience changes completely. From this new vantage point, everything becomes lighter. Suffering loses its stickiness because there's no someone for it to cling to. Fear loses its sharpness because there's no permanent self to protect. Desire loses its desperation because there's nothing missing that needs to be filled. Life still contains joy and sorrow, success and failure, pleasure and pain, but they flow more freely, no longer filtered through the narrow lens of me. Awakening also dissolves the illusion of control. When you see that life unfolds spontaneously, that actions arise without a doer, thoughts appear without a thinker, choices happen without a chooser, the burden of trying to manage everything lifts. You stop fighting the current and start floating with it. This doesn't mean you become passive. Actions still happen, often with greater clarity and compassion than before, but they happen naturally, without the constant interference of an imagined self. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of awakening is the shift it brings to how you see others. If there is no separate me, there is also no separate you. The same awareness looking out of your eyes is looking out of theirs. The same consciousness animating your life animates all life. Compassion ceases to be an effort and becomes a spontaneous expression of recognition. When someone suffers, it's not their suffering, it's our suffering. When someone loves, it's not their love, it's the universe loving itself through a particular form. This doesn't mean life becomes perfect. Old habits and conditioning may still arise. The ego may still whisper from time to time, trying to reclaim its throne. Awakening doesn't erase the illusion, it just reveals it. But once seen, the illusion can never again hold you completely. Even when you forget, a part of you remembers. Even when the dream pulls you in, something in you knows it's a dream. The journey beyond the illusion is not an escape from life. It is a deeper immersion into it. Freed from the narrow confines of self, you become fully available to experience. You taste food more vividly, listen more deeply, love more fiercely. Paradoxically, it's only when you stop clinging to your life that you truly begin to live it. The play of existence, once seen as a series of personal triumphs and tragedies, is revealed as what it always was, a magnificent, spontaneous unfolding. And so, awakening is not the end of the story, but the end of mistaking the story for reality. It is the moment you recognize that the you've been searching for has never existed, and that what remains without it is not emptiness, but fullness. Not nothing, but everything. It is the infinite awareness that watches worlds rise and fall, identities come and go, universes expand and contract, all without ever being touched. When this is seen clearly, even death loses its sting. How can awareness die when it was never born? How can you end when you were never a thing to begin with? The self was always a temporary costume, worn by something timeless. Awakening is simply the moment the actor remembers that they were never the role, and bows deeply to the stage on which the play unfolds. When you reach the end of a journey like this, when you've stripped away the thinker, the watcher, the doer, the believer, the storyteller, the dreamer, it's natural to look around and wonder what's left. If everything you believed yourself to be has dissolved, what remains? If the self was never real, then who has been living this life all along? The most unsettling, liberating answer is also the simplest. There was never anyone here in the first place. There was only life happening, only awareness, unfolding, only the universe, playing hide and seek with itself. For most of your life, the illusion of you has been the central reference point of every thought, feeling, and experience. It structured the world into inside and outside, mine and yours, success and failure. It created the story of a continuous, enduring I moving through time, acting, deciding, achieving, suffering. That story felt so vivid, so convincing, that you never stopped to question it. But now, after peeling back layer after layer, you can see it for what it is, a narrative woven out of memory, language, and habit, a trick of the mind, a mirage dancing above the desert sand. The revelation that the self was never real can at first feel like a loss. Something you clung to your entire life, something you thought was fundamental, is gone. But slowly the fear begins to dissolve, and in its place arises an immense freedom, because if there is no self, there is nothing to defend, no image to maintain, no past to regret or future to fear. Life no longer needs to conform to the story you once believed you were writing. It is free to unfold as it will, and you too are free to move with it. And this is the paradox. The illusion of self was never actually in the way. It never truly blocked reality from you. It was reality, playing dress up. Every thought of I, every story, every mistake, every triumph, all of it was part of the same unfolding, part of the same awareness expressing itself through form. You never needed to kill the self or escape it. All you needed was to see that it was never real to begin with. When this seeing deepens, even the language we use becomes slippery. Words like I, me, and mine still arise. They're useful tools for navigating the world, but they're no longer taken literally. They're understood as convenient fictions, pointers rather than truths. I am hungry doesn't mean a separate self is experiencing hunger. It means hunger is arising in awareness. I love you doesn't mean one isolated being loves another. It means love is flowing within consciousness. Life continues exactly as before, only now it's lighter, freer, less burdened by the illusion of ownership. Relationships shift too. When the boundaries of self dissolve, the line between self and other dissolves with them. Compassion ceases to be something you practice and becomes something you are. The suffering of another no longer feels like something happening out there. It's felt directly, immediately, as if it were your own, and their joy is your joy too. The world, once divided into separate entities competing for survival, is revealed as a seamless field of being, endlessly interacting with itself. This realization is not a conclusion but a beginning. It's the starting point of a new way of being, one that doesn't revolve around a fictional center. You will still make decisions, still pursue goals, still love and grieve and create, but you will do so knowing that none of it belongs to you. It is life doing what life does, dancing, dreaming, exploring, discovering itself anew in every moment. Even the great existential fears lose their teeth. Death, which once loomed like a final, terrifying full stop, is revealed to be nothing more than a change in the pattern of appearances. The body will fade, the memories will dissolve, the stories will end, but awareness was never born, and therefore cannot die. What you truly are was never alive in the conventional sense, so it can never end in the conventional sense. Death is simply the wave falling back into the ocean, a shift, not a tragedy. And so we return to where we began, but with new eyes. The self is not an entity but a process. It is not a substance but a story. It is not something you have to get rid of, because it was never truly there. All along, there was only awareness, pretending to be a person. Only consciousness, wearing 1,000 masks. Only life, moving through infinite forms, each one calling itself me. The self was never lost. It was never broken. It was never even real. And knowing that truly knowing it is the freedom you've been searching for all along. And perhaps in the quiet moments, between one breath and the next, between one thought and another, you will feel it, that stillness underneath the noise, that vastness behind the mask, that eternal presence that asks for nothing and includes everything. That is what you are. That is what you have always been. And that is what remains when the illusion of self dissolves into the reality that was always here.